Welcome, weary soul, to a journey through the twilight of the gods and the dawn of an age of darkness. Tonight, we explore the complete chronicle of Gwyn's fading realm, from the ancient war against the dragons to the final, desperate linking of the fire. This is a tale of kingdoms built on the bones of the past, of gods who feared their own mortality, and of the endless cycle that binds light and shadow in eternal dance. So settle into the embrace of night, let your burdens drift away like ash on the wind, and allow yourself to be carried through this ancient world where every flame must eventually fade. Close your eyes when you're ready, and let the story wash over you like the gentle warmth of a dying ember. In the beginning, before time itself had learned to count its own passage, there existed a world wrapped in grey fog, where the very concept of change was as foreign as colour to the blind. This was the Age of Ancients, a realm so perfectly still that even the wind seemed to hold its breath in respectful silence. Here, in this twilight between existence and void, towered the everlasting dragons, being so ancient and enduring that they had become part of the landscape itself, their stone scales reflecting the unchanging grey of their domain, like living mountains that had learned to breathe. The world of the ancients was built upon foundations that defied mortal understanding, great arch trees whose roots stretched down into the very bones of reality while their branches reached toward a sky that knew neither sun nor storm. These colossal pillars of bark and stone served as the architecture of eternity, their hollow trunks containing chambers vast enough to house entire civilizations, though none existed yet to claim such dwelling places. Between the mighty trees, on platforms of living stone that had grown rather than been built, the everlasting dragons made their eternal roost. They were not creatures in any sense that later ages would understand the term, but rather expressions of the world itself given form and consciousness. Each dragon was unique yet part of a greater whole, their stone scales forming a natural armor that rendered them truly immortal in a world where death had not yet been invented. These ancient lords knew neither hunger nor ambition, neither love nor hatred, for all such concepts belonged to an age not yet born. They simply existed, patient as the stones beneath them, wise with the accumulated weight of endless centuries, their great eyes reflecting depths of knowledge that encompassed all that was and ever had been. In their perfect stillness lay a kind of peace that mortal minds would struggle to comprehend, a harmony so complete that it seemed to resonate in the very air around them. The fog that perpetually shrouded this ancient realm was not merely weather, but something far more fundamental, the visible manifestation of a world in perfect balance, where no force pressed against another with sufficient strength to create change. This grey mist held within its embrace all possibilities and none, all potential futures suspended in eternal equipoise like drops of water that refused to fall. Yet deep beneath the roots of the arch trees, far below the stone platforms, where dragons dreamed their timeless dreams, something stirred in the darkness that even the ancient lords had not foreseen. In caverns that had never known the touch of fog or the presence of scaled guardians, flames began to flicker with a light that was not grey but gold, not eternal but urgent, not peaceful but hungry for change. The first flame burned in the depths like a star that had fallen from a sky that did not yet exist, its light casting dancing shadows that painted the cavern walls with the first glimpses of disparity the world had ever known. This was fire as the primordial force of transformation, the cosmic principle that would teach the universe the meaning of difference, the divine spark that would shatter the grey equilibrium and birth the concepts of light and dark, life and death, heat and cold. The flame called to certain souls with a voice that spoke not in words but in pure longing, promising power beyond imagination to those brave or foolish enough to seize it. 4 beings heard this call above all others, drawn from the hollow places of the world where they had existed in the same timeless stupor as all other creatures of the grey realm, but possessing within themselves some spark of potential that resonated with the flame's hungry light. Gwyn was the first among these chosen souls, though in that ancient time he bore no titles and commanded no armies, existing instead as little more than a flickering possibility wrapped in the semblance of form. Yet when he approached the first flame and gazed into its dancing heart, something within him recognized its true nature, and something within the flame recognized him in return. From its depths he claimed a soul of such brilliant white radiance that it seemed to contain the very essence of lightning itself, power that would teach him to command the storms and forge the weapons that could wound even immortal flesh. The Witch of Izalith came next, her approach to the flame marked by an understanding of its transformative potential that ran deeper than mere hunger for power. She saw in the dancing light not just strength, but the possibility of creation itself, the chance to nurture new forms of existence from the raw material of change. The soul she drew from the flame burned with the red intensity of her vision, carrying within it the secret of life itself and the terrible responsibility of wielding such creative force. Gravelord Nito approached the first flame from a different direction entirely, his perception shaped by an intuitive understanding of endings that complemented the flame's gift of beginnings. Where others saw in the fire only the promise of life and growth, he recognized the necessity of death and decay as part of the greater cycle, the profound truth that nothing new could be born until something old consented to pass away. The soul, he claimed, pulsed with the dark power of inevitable conclusion, granting him dominion over the final rest that all things must eventually embrace. The 4th soul called to a being so small and seemingly insignificant that even the flame itself seemed surprised by the response. The furtive pygmy crept forward from shadows that had never known light, drawn not by grand visions of power or creation, but by simple curiosity about this strange new source of warmth. The soul that came to rest within this humble form was different from the others, darker, more patient, carrying within it not the bright ambition of gods, but the quiet endurance of humanity itself. With the claiming of the Lord's souls, the Age of Ancients entered its final moments, though the dragons who ruled that grey realm remained unaware that anything had changed. The 4 who had touched the flame found themselves transformed by its power, no longer the hollow, directionless beings they had been, but entities possessed of will and purpose, ambition and dream. They had become the first lords of a new age, though that age had yet to be born from the ashes of the old. The transformation was not merely personal but cosmic in scope, for the claiming of the Lord's souls had introduced disparity into a world that had known only uniformity. Light now existed as a concept distinct from dark. Heat could be measured against cold, and for the first time in the history of existence, the possibility of death cast its shadow across the landscape of eternal life. The grey fog began to thin in places, revealing vistas that had been hidden for countless eons, while the archtrees themselves began to show signs of age, as time finally learned to move forward, rather than simply circling upon itself. The everlasting dragons, those patient guardians of the ancient order, began to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the world they had protected for so long. Their stone scales, which had always been proof against any force the grey realm could muster, now seemed somehow less absolute in their protection. The very air around them carried new scents and strange currents, while the fog that had been their constant companion grew restless and uncertain. Yet even as change began to creep through their timeless domain like water seeping through invisible cracks in stone, the dragons remained bound by the nature that had defined them since the beginning of existence. They were creatures of stasis and contemplation, slow to anger and slower still to action. Their responses measured in geological time, rather than the frantic pace that would characterize the coming age. This ancient patience, which had been their greatest strength in the grey world, would prove to be their fatal weakness when faced with enemies who had learned to embrace the swift currents of change. The four who possessed the Lord's souls found themselves drawn together by forces they could not yet fully understand, their individual powers seeming to call to one another like notes in a harmony they were only beginning to learn to play. Gwyn's lightning crackled with divine authority. The witch's flames danced with creative passion. Nito's darkness pulsed with the promise of necessary endings, and the pygmy's soul burned with the quiet fire that would one day kindle hope in the hearts of countless generations. Together, these four represented everything the Age of Ancients had never known and could never comprehend. They were change incarnate, the living embodiment of a cosmic principle that had been absent from the world since its creation. Their very existence posed a challenge to the eternal order that the dragons had maintained, though none yet understood the full implications of what had been set in motion by the claiming of the Lord's souls. The grey fog continued its slow retreat, revealing landscapes of incredible beauty that had waited eons for eyes capable of appreciating their splendor. Rivers ran clear and cold between hills that rolled like frozen waves, while forests of trees untouched by any axe stretched toward horizons that had never known boundaries. This was a world pregnant with possibility, waiting only for the spark of divine will to transform potential into reality. The first flame continued to burn in its deep cavern, though it was no longer alone in the darkness. Its light had birthed other flames, smaller but no less significant, each one representing a fragment of the greater fire that would spread throughout the awakening world. These flames would become the hearths around which new civilizations would gather, the forges where legendary weapons would be born, and the altars where gods and mortals alike would come to seek power and purpose. As the age drew toward its inevitable conclusion, the very concept of conclusion was being born for the first time. The grey equilibrium that had defined existence since the beginning was giving way to something far more dynamic and dangerous, a world where opposing forces would clash and create new realities from the violence of their meeting. Light would battle dark, life would struggle against death, and order would war with chaos in conflicts that would echo through all the ages yet to come. The everlasting dragons, those ancient guardians of the fading order, began their long, slow awakening to the reality that their time of perfect peace was ending. Soon they would be called upon to defend their grey realm against enemies who fought not with tooth and claw but with forces they had never encountered: the lightning of divine wrath, the flames of transformation, and the darkness of inevitable change. The Age of Ancients was ending, though it would die as it had lived, with dignity and patience, and a kind of terrible beauty that would be remembered long after its grey fog had been burned away by the harsh light of a younger, more violent world. The transformation that followed the claiming of the Lord's souls was not immediate, but inevitable, like the slow turning of a great wheel that had been set in motion by forces beyond any single will to control. The four who had touched the first flame found themselves changed in ways that went deeper than mere acquisition of power, their very natures rewritten by energies that had slumbered in the depths since the world's creation. They were no longer creatures of the grey realm, but something entirely new, beings of purpose and ambition, who carried within themselves the seeds of an age yet to be born. Gwyn stood tallest among them, his form wreathed in lightning that crackled with divine authority, each spark carrying the promise of storms that could shake the very foundations of the ancient world. The soul he had claimed from the first flame burned within him like a captive star, its brilliant white radiance transforming his understanding of what was possible in a realm that had known only limitation. He saw in the unchanging grey landscape not peaceful perfection but stagnation that cried out for the cleansing fire of transformation. The lightning that danced around his fingers was not mere elemental force, but the physical manifestation of his will made tangible, power that could reach across vast distances to strike with the precision of divine judgment. When he raised his hand toward the grey sky, thunder answered his call, rolling across the heavens, with a voice that spoke of authority beyond mortal comprehension. The everlasting dragons, those patient guardians of the ancient order, began to stir uneasily in their stone roosts as vibrations they had never felt before echoed through the platforms of their timeless domain. The Witch of Izalith stood beside him, her red soul pulsing with the rhythm of creative passion, flames dancing around her form like living extensions of her will. She had drawn from the first flame not the power to destroy, but the far more profound ability to create, to nurture new forms of existence from the raw materials of possibility. Her flames carried within them the secret of life itself, the divine spark that could kindle awareness in dead stone and teach the earth to bear fruit where before only barren rock had endured. Her daughters, born from the fragments of her own soul, and shaped by the creative fires that burned within her, stood as testament to her transformative power. Each one embodied a different aspect of the flame's creative potential, their forms shifting between human and elemental as they learned to master the forces their mother had gifted them. Together, they represented the flowering of imagination made manifest, proof that the grey world's age of stagnation was drawing to its inevitable close. Gravelord Nito manifested as something far more unsettling than his companions. His form wreathed not in lightning or flame, but in the darker energies of entropy and decay. The soul he carried pulsed with the quiet certainty of endings, the profound understanding that nothing new could be born until something old consented to pass away. His presence seemed to accelerate the natural processes that the grey world had held in eternal suspension, causing stone to crumble and fog to dissipate wherever his shadow fell. Yet there was nothing malevolent in his nature, for he understood better than any of the others that destruction and creation were but two faces of the same cosmic principle. His power over death was balanced by an equal mastery of the transformation that followed ending, the alchemy that turned endings into beginnings and made space for new wonders to emerge from the ashes of the old. In his hollow eyes burned the wisdom of necessary sacrifice, the knowledge that some prices must be paid for the sake of futures yet unborn. The furtive pygmy remained as enigmatic as ever, his small form carrying within it a soul that seemed almost to absorb light rather than radiate it. Where the others blazed with obvious power, he whispered with potential that remained largely hidden, his dark soul containing mysteries that would not fully reveal themselves until ages yet to come. He moved through the awakening world like a shadow learning to cast itself, present but not commanding, significant in ways that none yet fully understood. The claiming of the Lord's souls had introduced disparity into a world that had known only unity, and with disparity came conflict as different forces met and tested their strength against one another. The grey fog that had once wrapped everything in peaceful uniformity began to thin and part, revealing landscapes of breathtaking beauty that had waited eons for eyes capable of appreciating their splendor. Ancient valleys opened to skies that learned for the first time to show blue between the shifting clouds, while rivers began to run with waters that caught and reflected the new light streaming down from above. Yet for all the beauty of this awakening world, it was the everlasting dragons who commanded the greatest attention from the newly ascended lords. These ancient rulers of the Grey Realm remained as they had always been, creatures of perfect stasis and timeless contemplation, their stone scales reflecting an order that had endured since the beginning of existence itself. They were magnificent in their terrible patience, being so vast and enduring that they seemed more like natural features than living creatures. Their presence, a constant reminder of the world that was passing away. The dragon's stone scales were their most remarkable feature, plates of living rock that had grown over countless eons to form armor of absolute perfection. These scales were not merely protective, but embodied the very principle of immortality that had defined the Age of Ancients, each one a small fragment of eternity made manifest in physical form. No force known to the grey world could pierce or damage these scales, for they partook of the same unchanging nature that had made the dragons themselves truly everlasting. Yet the Lord's souls had brought with them new forms of power that the ancient world had never encountered, forces that operated according to principles the dragons could not comprehend. Gwyn's lightning carried within it the essence of divine authority, energy that struck not merely at physical targets, but at the spiritual foundations of immortality itself. When his spears of crackling light found their mark, they did not simply wound, but challenged the very concept of everlasting existence, introducing the possibility of change even into forms that had been designed to resist all transformation. The discovery that the dragon's stone scales could be pierced by lightning came as a revelation that shattered assumptions as old as the world itself. For the first time in the history of existence, the everlasting dragons found themselves facing a force that could actually threaten their ancient dominion. The perfectly balanced order they had maintained through countless eons suddenly revealed itself to be vulnerable, dependent upon conditions that were no longer guaranteed to endure. This vulnerability was not merely physical but philosophical, striking at the heart of what the dragons represented. They were creatures of absolute stasis who had never needed to adapt or evolve, their perfection lying in their complete immunity to change. When lightning proved capable of piercing their scales, it did more than wound their bodies. It wounded their very conception of themselves and their place in the cosmic order. Seath the Scaleless stood apart from his brethren, unique among the everlasting dragons in his lack of the stone scales that defined his kind. Where others bore armor of living rock, his hide remained soft and vulnerable, marking him as different in ways that had made him an object of curiosity and perhaps pity among his fellow dragons. This difference had shaped his perspective in profound ways, granting him insights that his perfectly armored kin could never achieve. The scaleless dragon had spent eons contemplating the nature of immortality from the perspective of one who lacked its most obvious manifestation. While his brethren rested secure in their invulnerability, Seath had been forced to develop other forms of strength, delving deep into the mysteries of crystal and soul, seeking knowledge that might compensate for his apparent weakness. His studies had revealed truths about the nature of existence that even the most ancient of dragons had never suspected. When the Lord's souls emerged and began to challenge the ancient order, Seath alone among the dragons possessed the flexibility of thought necessary to recognize the changing tide. He saw in Gwyn's lightning not merely a threat to be endured, but an opportunity to be seized, a chance to ally himself with forces that might finally grant him the immortality he had always lacked. His decision to betray his own kind was born not from malice, but from a profound understanding of necessity, the recognition that the Age of Ancients was ending whether the dragons chose to accept that reality or not. The betrayal itself was as elegant as it was devastating. Seath sharing with the Lords the secret knowledge that made his brethren vulnerable to their newfound powers. He revealed the hidden weak points in dragon anatomy, where lightning could find purchase. The specific angles of attack that could penetrate even the strongest scales, the ancient dragon lore that transformed mortal enemies into forces capable of threatening immortal beings. In exchange for this betrayal, Seath received something his fellow dragons had never thought to offer him: a fragment of Gwyn's own soul, a shard of the Lord's soul that granted him a form of immortality even more profound than the stone scales he had always lacked. The scales of his brethren might resist physical damage, but Seath's new immortality was woven from the very fabric of the soul itself, making him truly everlasting in ways that even the ancient dragons could not match. The war that followed was unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. A conflict that shattered the grey equilibrium and painted the sky with colours born from violence and transformation. Gwyn led his growing army of followers into battle against the everlasting dragons, his lightning spears cutting through the ancient mists like divine proclamations of a new age. Each bolt that found its mark announced the death of immortality itself, the revolutionary concept that even eternal beings could be brought to ending when faced with sufficient will and power. The Witch of Izalith unleashed her daughters and their firestorms upon the dragon strongholds, their flames consuming not just the physical forms of their enemies, but the very idea of unchanging perfection that had defined the ancient realm. Her creative fires transformed the grey landscapes into scenes of terrible beauty, where destruction and renewal danced together in patterns that spoke of cosmic forces too vast for mortal minds to fully comprehend. The dragons found themselves facing not merely elemental fire, but the fundamental force of transformation itself, flames that could change the very nature of what they touched. Gravelord Nito brought to the battlefield something even more unsettling than lightning or flame: the concept of death itself made manifest as a weapon of war. His necromantic arts introduced disease and decay to creatures who had never known such concepts, their immortal forms learning for the first time what it meant to weaken and suffer. The miasma that flowed from his presence carried within it the accumulated weight of all possible endings, forcing the dragons to confront the reality of their own mortality in ways that challenged their fundamental understanding of existence. The battles raged across landscapes that transformed with each passing day, the grey fog burning away to reveal vistas of incredible beauty and terrible desolation. Ancient platforms that had supported dragon roosts for eons crumbled beneath the assault of divine lightning, while arch trees that had stood since the world's creation blazed like massive torches as the witch's flames consumed their hollow trunks. The very air crackled with energies that had never existed before, forces that wrote new laws of physics across skies that learned to wear colours other than endless grey. Yet for all their power, the dragons did not yield easily to the forces arrayed against them. These were beings who had ruled the world since its creation, creatures whose wisdom encompassed eons of accumulated experience, and whose strength had been tested against every force the ancient realm could muster. They fought with the terrible dignity of immortals, who understood that their time was ending, but refused to surrender without demonstrating the full majesty of what was being lost. Their breath could freeze the very soul within a warrior's body, turning bold knights into statues of ice that would endure long after the battles ended. Their claws could rend the fabric of reality itself, opening wounds in the world that bled strange energies and revealed glimpses of realms beyond mortal understanding. When they took to the skies, their wings cast shadows that dimmed the new sun, and their roars shook mountains that had stood firm since the earth's foundation. The war stretched across years that seemed like lifetimes, each battle reshaping not just the physical landscape but the fundamental nature of what was possible in a world learning to embrace change. Cities that had never existed before rose from the ashes of dragon strongholds, their architecture reflecting the dreams and ambitions of beings who had tasted divine power and found it intoxicating. Rivers learned to run red with the blood of immortals, while the sky itself bore scars from conflicts that transcended mere physical violence. Gwyn's knights, those brave souls who had rallied to his banner and received fragments of his divine lightning, became legends in their own right as they proved that mortal courage could stand against immortal power when blessed by sufficient divine favor. They rode into battle against creatures that dwarfed mountains, their silver armor gleaming with reflected lightning, as they sought to prove that the age of mortals could claim dominion over realms that had belonged to gods since time immemorial. The Silver Knights, as they would come to be known, embodied the finest qualities of the emerging age: courage tempered by wisdom, strength guided by justice, and above all, the willingness to sacrifice everything in service of a cause greater than any individual life. Their spears crackled with borrowed lightning as they charged into battle, their shields blazing with divine light as they stood firm against attacks that could shatter stone and melt metal. Each victory came at tremendous cost, for the dragons did not fall easily, even when stripped of their immortal invulnerability. Their death throes could level entire valleys, their final breaths creating storms that raged for decades, their spilled blood seeping into the earth to create landscapes of such beauty and terror that they would be remembered in song and story for all the ages to come. The price of victory was measured not just in lives lost, but in the fundamental transformation of everything that had once seemed permanent and unchangeable. As the war reached its climax, the remaining dragons began to understand that their defeat was inevitable, that the forces arrayed against them represented not mere rebellion, but evolutionary necessity itself. The Age of Ancients had been beautiful in its timeless perfection, but beauty alone was not sufficient to resist the tide of change that swept across the awakening world. They were creatures of stasis facing enemies who embodied dynamism itself, immortals confronting forces that had learned to make mortality into a source of strength rather than weakness. The final battles took place among the highest peaks and deepest valleys of the ancient realm, in places where the grey fog still clung like the last memories of a dying age. Here, the greatest of the dragons made their final stands, their forms silhouetted against skies that blazed with colours that had never existed before. Lightning and fire painted the heavens in shades of gold and crimson, while the earth itself groaned beneath the weight of forces that challenged the very foundations of reality. When the last dragon fell, when the final roar of ancient defiance faded into silence, the world that emerged from the ashes of conflict was transformed beyond all recognition. The grey fog had lifted entirely, revealing landscapes of breathtaking beauty where new forms of life began to flourish under skies that had learned to show blue between the drifting clouds. Rivers ran clear and bright between hills that rolled like frozen waves, while forests of trees untouched by any axe stretched toward horizons that promised infinite possibility. Yet the victory was not without its shadows, for the lords who had claimed dominion over this new world carried within themselves the knowledge of what their triumph had cost. They had destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable, ended an age of perfect peace in favor of one that promised constant change and conflict. The dragons they had slain had been magnificent in their ancient wisdom, creatures whose only crime had been their inability to adapt to forces they could not understand or control. The guilt of this necessary destruction would haunt the victorious lords throughout all the ages to come, a reminder that even the most justified revolution leaves scars that time alone cannot heal. They had won the right to shape the world according to their vision, but they had paid for that right with the blood of immortals and the destruction of wonders that could never be recreated or replaced. The Age of Fire had begun, born from the ashes of the Age of Ancients, and blessed with the divine authority of the Lord Souls. Yet even in the moment of greatest triumph, shadows of future sorrow were already beginning to gather, For those who rule through force must always fear that others might one day possess greater force, and those who destroy immortals must face the possibility that their own immortality might prove equally fragile when tested by forces they cannot foresee or control. The war against the dragons was over, but the age it had birthed would prove to be defined by conflicts yet to come, struggles between light and dark that would echo through all the centuries ahead. The lords had claimed their victory, but they had also inherited the responsibility of maintaining a world that had learned to embrace change as its fundamental principle, a burden that would test their wisdom and strength in ways that even their triumph over the everlasting dragons had not prepared them to face. With the last echoes of ancient roars fading into silence, and the grey fog finally lifting from landscapes that had waited eons to feel the warmth of true sunlight, the lords who had claimed victory over the everlasting dragons found themselves faced with a challenge, perhaps even greater than the war they had just won. They possessed the power to reshape the world according to their vision, but the canvas they had inherited was vast beyond comprehension, a realm that stretched from horizons lost in morning mist to peaks that scraped the very ceiling of the sky itself. Gwyn stood tallest among the victorious lords, his form still wreathed in the divine lightning that had proven so devastating against dragon scales. But now his thoughts turned from destruction to creation, from the necessary violence of revolution to the more delicate art of building something worthy to rise from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The soul of light that burned within him pulsed with visions of cities that could touch the heavens themselves, architectural dreams that would make manifest the glory of the new age he had helped to birth. The location he chose for his great work was a peak that rose above all others, a mountain so tall that its summit existed in a realm between earth and sky, where the air grew thin and pure, and the light of the first flame could be seen dancing in the depths below. Here, on foundations of living stone that had never known the weight of dragon roost or the touch of grey fog, Gwyn began the construction of Londo, the city of the gods that would serve as the crown jewel of the New World Order. The name itself carried within it the essence of his vision, Londo, the city of the sun, a place where light would reign eternal, and the divine nature of those who ruled would be made manifest in every soaring spire and graceful arch. This would not be merely a city, but a statement written in stone and crystal, a declaration that the age of grey stagnation had ended forever, and that beauty beyond imagination was possible when divine will was wedded to unlimited ambition. The construction of Londo was a work that spanned decades, each stone placed with the precision of divine mathematics, every arch calculated to capture and reflect the golden light that streamed down from skies that had learned to show blue between the drifting clouds. Gwyn's lightning did not merely serve as a weapon, but as a tool of creation, his divine electricity flowing through the stone to bind it into structures that defied conventional understanding of what architecture could achieve. The great cathedral that formed the heart of the city rose like a prayer made manifest in marble and gold, its spires reaching toward heights that seemed to touch the very realm of the divine. Within its vast nave, light fell in shafts of such purity that they seemed almost solid, illuminating spaces so beautiful that mortals who glimpsed them would carry the memory for the rest of their lives like a blessing burned into their very souls. The royal palace sprawled across the highest tier of the city, its chambers and halls designed on a scale that reflected the godlike nature of those who would inhabit them. Here were rooms vast enough to hold entire armies, their ceilings lost in shadows that seemed to stretch toward infinity, their walls decorated with tapestries that told the story of the war against the dragons in threads of gold and silver that caught and reflected light in patterns of breathtaking complexity. Yet for all its grandeur, Londo was designed not merely to inspire awe, but to function as the administrative heart of a growing divine kingdom. council chambers where the lords could meet to discuss matters of cosmic importance, libraries where the accumulated wisdom of the new age could be preserved for future generations, armories where weapons of divine craftsmanship could be stored against the possibility of future conflicts. Every aspect of the city served both aesthetic and practical purposes. The Silver Knights, who had proven themselves in the war against the dragons, found new purpose as the guardians of this divine citadel, their armor polished to mirror brightness as they took up positions at strategic points throughout the city. Their presence served not merely as protection, but as living symbols of the courage and dedication that had made the New Age possible, reminders that even gods required the service of those willing to sacrifice everything in defense of noble ideals. These knights embodied the finest qualities of the emerging order: loyalty absolute and unquestioning, courage that had been tested in battles against immortal foes, and a dedication to duty that transcended personal desire or ambition. They moved through the gleaming halls of Anor Londo like living statues, their every gesture reflecting the discipline and training that had been honed in the crucible of divine warfare. The captain of these Silver Knights was a figure of particular renown, a warrior whose skill with spear and shield had become legendary even among those who served alongside the gods themselves. His armor blazed with reflected divinity, each plate perfectly fitted and inscribed with runes of protection that had been blessed by Gwyn's own lightning. When he walked the battlements of Anor Londo, his presence was enough to reassure even the most nervous visitors that they stood under the protection of forces that would never falter in their duty. Yet Anor Londo was not merely a military fortress or administrative center, but a home for the divine family that Gwyn had gathered around himself in the centuries following the war. His children, born from the union of divine power and the mysterious forces that governed the creation of new life in the transformed world, each embodied different aspects of their father's nature while possessing unique gifts that would shape the character of the emerging age. Princess Guinevere stood as the most visible symbol of the royal family's divine nature, her beauty so radiant that it seemed to emanate light from within, illuminating any chamber she entered, with a warmth that went beyond mere physical illumination. She was tall even by the standards of gods, her golden hair falling in waves that seemed to capture and hold sunlight, her voice carrying tones that could soothe the most troubled hearts or inspire the most cowardly souls to acts of heroism. The princess served not merely as an ornament to her father's court, but as an active participant in the governance of the divine kingdom, her wisdom in matters of diplomacy and statecraft proving invaluable as the gods worked to establish relationships with the various mortal peoples who had begun to flourish in the transformed world. Her presence at negotiations could turn potential conflicts into lasting alliances, her smile serving as a more powerful diplomatic tool than any army or threat. Prince Gwyndolin represented a more mysterious aspect of the royal family, his nature reflecting the complex relationship between light and shadow that defined the new age. Born under the influence of the moon rather than the sun, he possessed abilities that complemented his father's solar authority, while operating according to principles that seemed almost opposite to those that governed the rest of the divine court. The prince's mastery of illusion and lunar magic made him invaluable in matters that required subtlety rather than overwhelming force, his ability to weave dreams and visions serving purposes that went far beyond mere entertainment. Through his arts, the influence of Anor Londo could extend far beyond the physical boundaries of the city itself, reaching into the minds and hearts of mortals who had never seen the divine citadel, but who carried within their dreams the image of its impossible beauty. Yet there was also a third child of Gwyn's line, one whose name would eventually be stricken from all records, and whose very existence would become a source of shame and sorrow for the divine family. The nameless king, as he would come to be known in the fragmentary accounts that survived the efforts to erase him from history, possessed a nature that aligned him more closely with the ancient ways of honor and combat than with his father's vision of ordered divine rule. This prince had inherited not just his father's command of lightning, but a love of battle itself that went beyond mere duty or necessity, finding in the clash of arms and the test of strength against worthy opponents a meaning and purpose that the peaceful administration of divine authority could never provide. His dragons, tamed through force of will and mutual respect rather than conquered and destroyed, served as both companions and symbols of his rejection of the total victory his father had achieved over the ancient order. The nameless king's eventual exile from Anor Londo would cast a shadow over the golden age of the gods, a reminder that even divine families were not immune to the conflicts between different visions of what the future should hold. His departure from the city would leave an empty throne in the Great Hall and a silence in the council chambers that no amount of official forgetting could completely erase. The daily life of Anor Londo during its golden age reflected the divine nature of its inhabitants, while remaining grounded in the practical necessities of governing a world that grew more complex with each passing year. The great bells that rang out over the city marked not just the passage of hours but the rhythm of cosmic forces, their tones calibrated to resonate with the fundamental frequencies that governed the relationship between light and shadow, order and chaos. The servants who maintained the divine city were drawn from among the most skilled and dedicated mortals, individuals who had proven themselves worthy of the honor through years of faithful service and demonstrated competence. They moved through the gleaming halls like shadows cast by divine light, their presence barely noticed, but absolutely essential to the smooth functioning of the celestial bureaucracy. The kitchens of Anor Londo produced feasts that would have fed entire mortal cities, the divine appetites requiring sustenance on a scale that reflected their cosmic nature. The wine cellars contained vintages that had been aged through processes that involved exposure to lightning and flame, their flavors carrying hints of the elemental forces that had shaped the new world. The gardens that surrounded the palace were marvels of divine horticulture, where flowers bloomed in patterns that reflected mathematical principles governing the structure of light itself, and trees grew in configurations that channeled and focused the cosmic energies flowing through the transformed world. Here the gods could walk in contemplation, their footsteps leaving traces of power that would nurture the growth of plants for generations to come. The libraries of Anor Londo contained the accumulated wisdom of the New Age, their shelves holding scrolls and tomes that recorded not just the practical knowledge needed to govern a divine kingdom, but the philosophical insights that emerged from the unprecedented situation of mortals elevated to godhood through their proximity to the Lord souls. Scholars who gained access to these repositories would emerge with understanding that transformed their perception of reality itself. Yet, the true heart of Anor Londo lay not in its physical magnificence, but in the relationships between the gods who inhabited it, and the growing network of alliances and obligations that connected the divine city to the mortal settlements that had begun to flourish throughout the transformed world. The establishment of the Way of White represented Gwyn's most ambitious attempt to create a unified religious and philosophical framework that could bind together peoples of vastly different backgrounds and cultures under the banner of divine authority. This religious doctrine taught that the first flame represented the ultimate source of all legitimate authority, that the gods who had emerged from its light carried within themselves the divine mandate to rule over the lesser beings who had not been blessed with such direct contact with cosmic power. The Way of White promised salvation and protection to those who submitted willingly to divine guidance, while threatening destruction to those who chose the path of rebellion against the natural order. The establishment of temples dedicated to the Way of White throughout the mortal lands served multiple purposes beyond mere religious instruction, functioning as administrative centers where the will of Aenor Londo could be communicated to distant populations, and as recruitment centers where individuals of exceptional talent or dedication could be identified and brought to serve the populations. Growing divine bureaucracy. The priests who served in these temples were trained not just in theological doctrine but in the practical arts of governance and diplomacy, their white robes marking them as representatives of divine authority, while their knowledge of local customs and languages made them effective intermediaries between the cosmic perspective of the gods and the immediate concerns of mortal communities. The miracles that these priests could perform through their faith and training served as tangible proof of the divine power that backed their authority, healing that could mend wounds beyond mortal medicine, and light that could drive back darkness, both physical and spiritual. These demonstrations of power helped to establish the credibility of the Way of White while providing practical benefits that made divine rule appear not just inevitable, but genuinely beneficial to those who accepted it. Yet the golden age of Aenor Londo was also marked by the construction of great works that served purposes beyond immediate governance or religious instruction, monuments to divine ambition that would endure long after the circumstances that had created them had passed into legend. Sen's fortress represented perhaps the most enigmatic of these constructions, a structure that seemed to exist somewhere between practical fortification and elaborate test of worthiness. The fortress rose from foundations that had been carved directly into living rock, its walls incorporating architectural principles that seemed to defy conventional understanding of structural engineering. The passages within twisted and turned according to patterns that reflected divine mathematics rather than human logic, their configuration designed to challenge and test anyone who sought to penetrate the structure's mysteries. The traps and mechanisms that filled Sen's fortress were works of art in their own right, engineering marvels that combined practical defensive function with aesthetic beauty in ways that spoke of minds capable of thinking on scales that transcended mortal limitations. Pressure plates that triggered cascades of precisely balanced boulders, pendulum blades that swung with mathematical precision, pathways that required perfect timing and flawless execution to navigate safely every element of the fortress, demanded excellence from those who would prove themselves worthy of divine attention. Yet the true purpose of Sen's fortress remained shrouded in mystery. Its function as a testing ground for potential heroes balanced against its role as a monument to divine power and a demonstration of the engineering marvels that became possible when unlimited resources were directed by minds that thought in terms of cosmic rather than merely human scales. The great bridges that connected different sections of Aenor Londo represented another triumph of divine engineering, spans of stone and crystal that crossed chasms so vast that their bottoms disappeared into mist and shadow. These bridges were not merely functional but beautiful beyond description, their arches following curves that seemed to embody musical harmonies translated into architectural form. The craftsmanship that went into every element of Aenor Londo's construction reflected the divine nature of its builders and inhabitants, with details so fine and precise that mortal artisans would spend lifetimes trying to achieve a fraction of such perfection. The doors were carved from single blocks of stone that had been transformed through divine alchemy into materials that combined the strength of metal with the beauty of precious gems, their surfaces bearing reliefs that told stories of the war against the dragons in visual narratives of breathtaking complexity. The windows of the divine city were glazed with crystals that had been grown rather than cut, their surfaces configured to filter and focus light in ways that created internal illumination patterns of incredible beauty. When the sun reached certain angles, the entire city would blaze with colors that had no names in any mortal language, transformations of natural light into displays of such magnificence that witnesses would remember them as divine visions rather than mere architectural effects. The golden age of Anor Londo represented the flowering of divine civilization at its most magnificent, a period when unlimited power was wedded to unlimited ambition in service of a vision that sought to create beauty and order on a cosmic scale. The gods who ruled from their celestial city had proven themselves capable of destroying the immortal guardians of the ancient world, and now they devoted that same terrible competence to the more delicate art of creating something worthy to replace what they had swept away. Yet, even in the midst of this unprecedented prosperity and achievement, shadows were beginning to gather that would eventually challenge the foundations upon which the divine kingdom had been built. The first flame that had made everything possible was not a constant source, but a fire like any other, subject to the same laws that governed all combustion, slowly but inevitably consuming the fuel that sustained its burning. The signs of this approaching crisis were subtle at first, visible only to those whose understanding of cosmic forces allowed them to perceive changes that operated on scales far greater than mortal lifespans. The light that streamed from the depths where the first flame burned seemed fractionally less brilliant than it had been in the immediate aftermath of the war against the dragons, while the Lord souls that had been drawn from that flame showed the first, almost imperceptible signs of dimming. The gods who ruled from Anor Londo remained confident in their power and secure in their achievements. Their attention focused on the immediate concerns of governing their expanding domain rather than on abstract possibilities that might or might not manifest in the distant future. They had proven themselves capable of overcoming challenges that had seemed insurmountable, and they saw no reason to doubt that their wisdom and strength would prove equal to whatever trials the future might hold. The Golden Age continued to shine, with undiminished brilliance, its light streaming down from the divine city to illuminate a world that had learned to flourish under the guidance of beings who carried within themselves fragments of the cosmic fire that had birthed the very concept of existence as something more than grey stagnation. The gods reigned supreme in their magnificent citadel, their authority unquestioned and their power seemingly absolute, masters of a realm that reflected their divine nature in every gleaming surface and soaring arch. Yet like all ages, this one too carried within itself the seeds of its own transformation, forces that would eventually challenge even the might of gods and test whether divine authority could endure the same cycles of change that had brought it to power in the first place. In the depths beneath Anor Londo, where the roots of the divine city extended into caverns that had never known the touch of sunlight, the first whispers of cosmic unease began to stir like autumn winds that carry the scent of winter still months away. The signs were so subtle that only those whose understanding encompassed the fundamental forces that governed reality itself could perceive them, a fractional dimming in the light that rose from the deepest chambers, a barely perceptible cooling in the air that flowed through passages carved from living stone, the slightest hesitation in the rhythm that had pulsed through the transformed world since the claiming of the Lord Souls. The Witch of Izalith, whose red soul had granted her dominion over the creative fires, and whose daughters embodied the flowering of flame made manifest in countless forms, was among the first to recognize these portents for what they truly represented. Her connection to the fundamental forces of creation ran deeper than mere power or authority, extending into realms of understanding where the abstract principles that governed existence revealed themselves to minds capable of perceiving beyond the boundaries that constrained ordinary thought. In her great hall beneath the earth, where lava flowed in channels carved by her own will, and crystals grew in patterns that reflected the mathematical relationships governing the transformation of energy into matter, the witch contemplated the implications of what her senses were beginning to detect. The first flame, That cosmic hearth from which all the wonders of the new age had emerged was showing the first signs of the inevitable fate that awaited all fires, the gradual consumption of the fuel that sustained its burning. The revelation struck her with the force of divine lightning, though its implications unfolded slowly, like a flower blooming in her consciousness over days and weeks of careful observation and measurement. The flame that had seemed eternal was not truly everlasting, but rather a fire of such magnitude that its dimming occurred on scales that dwarfed mortal comprehension of time. Yet dim it would, as surely as any candle or torch, its light gradually fading until the disparity it had introduced to the grey world would collapse back into the ancient equilibrium of unchanging mist. The consequences of such a catastrophe would extend far beyond the mere inconvenience of darkness, for the first flame was not simply a source of illumination, but the foundational principle upon which the entire structure of the new reality had been built. Without its light, to maintain the distinction between opposing forces, the concepts of life and death, heat and cold, light and shadow would blur back into the grey uniformity that had defined the age of ancients. Everything that had been built upon the foundation of disparity, the cities, the kingdoms, the very gods themselves would fade like dreams at the break of day. The witch's daughters, those radiant beings who embodied different aspects of her creative flame, began to sense their mother's growing concern through bonds that transcended mere blood relationship. They approached her with questions that carried undertones of worry, their own connection to the cosmic fires, making them sensitive to changes that remained invisible to those whose souls had not been shaped by direct contact with the fundamental forces of creation. The fair lady, youngest and most beloved of the daughters, possessed a sensitivity to the deeper currents of flame that made her particularly aware of the subtle shifts occurring in the cosmic order. Her alabaster skin seemed to glow with inner light as she knelt beside her mother's throne, her voice carrying tones of concern that rippled through the heated air like music made from worry itself. Quelana, whose mastery of pyromancy had elevated her to a position of particular respect among the flame wielders, brought with her observations gathered from the deepest chambers where the most advanced firecrafting was practiced. The flames she had been nurturing for decades, flames that had been kindled directly from fragments of her mother's soul, were showing signs of instability that defied explanation according to any principles she understood. Quelag, fierce and proud, reported from the boundaries of their domain where the creative fires met the cooler realms beyond, her warrior's instincts detecting changes in the fundamental balance of forces that suggested approaching conflict of a magnitude that would dwarf even the war against the everlasting dragons. Her spider-like lower body, a manifestation of her unique connection to both earth and flame, trembled with tension as she described phenomena that her experience could categorize but not fully explain. The other daughters brought their own observations, each filtered through the particular aspects of flame that defined their individual natures, creating a comprehensive picture of cosmic change that filled the witch with both determination and dread. The first flame was indeed dying, its light slowly but inevitably fading toward an extinction that would bring about the end of everything they had helped to create and everything they had learned to love about the transformed world. Yet, the Witch of Izalith had not claimed a Lord's soul and survived the war against immortal dragons by accepting defeat in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. Her red soul pulsed with the same creative fire that had helped reshape the ancient world, and within her mind began to form a plan of such audacity that it seemed to partake of both genius and madness in equal measure. If the first flame was destined to fade, then she would simply create a new flame to take its place, a fire born not from the mysterious forces that had birthed the original, but from her own understanding of the principles that govern the transformation of possibility into reality. The conception of this plan filled her with excitement that bordered on intoxication, the pure joy of creation contemplating its own ultimate expression. She would not merely rekindle the dying flame but improve upon it, crafting a source of light and disparity that would burn more brightly and endure longer than the cosmic accident that had started the current age. Her flame would be a work of art as much as a source of power, a testament to the creative potential that had been unlocked when consciousness first touched the primal fires. The preparations for this great working consumed months of careful planning and experimentation, as the witch and her daughters explored every aspect of flamecraft that their combined knowledge encompassed. They studied the relationship between different types of combustion, experimented with materials that could serve as fuel for fires that transcended the merely physical, and developed techniques for channeling creative energy on scales that had never been attempted by any being mortal or divine. The laboratory that the witch established for her great work was a marvel of flame engineering, a complex of chambers carved from living rock and lined with crystals that had been grown specifically to focus and amplify the energies that would be involved in the creation process. Rivers of lava flowed through channels that formed geometric patterns of incredible complexity, their currents precisely controlled to create temperature gradients and energy flows that would support the delicate work of cosmic creation. Her daughters threw themselves into the project with enthusiasm that matched their mother's own, each contributing unique insights and abilities that enriched the overall design. The fair lady's sensitivity to the subtlest variations in flame allowed her to detect irregularities that might have compromised the working's success, while Quilana's technical mastery provided the precision necessary to implement theoretical concepts in practical terms. Quelag's warrior nature proved invaluable in planning for the dangerous aspects of the work, her instincts for conflict helping to identify potential failure modes that could transform creative energy into destructive force. The other daughters contributed their own expertise, creating a collaborative effort that represented the pinnacle of flamecraft as it was understood in that age. The rituals that would govern the creation of the new flame drew upon every tradition of fireworking that had been developed since the claiming of the Lord Souls, combined with innovations that emerged from the witch's unique understanding of the creative process. Sacred geometries were carved into the floors and walls of the working chambers, their patterns designed to channel cosmic energies along paths that would maximize the efficiency of the transformation they sought to achieve. Rare materials gathered from the farthest reaches of the transformed world were incorporated into the working, substances that had been touched by the first flame's light and retained within their molecular structure traces of the original creative energy, crystals that had grown in the presence of divine lightning, metals that had been forged in the heat of dragon breath, waters that had flowed through chambers where the Lord Souls had first been claimed. Every component was chosen for its ability to serve as a bridge between the old flame and the new. The incantations that would guide the transformation were composed in languages that predated even the age of ancients, words of power that spoke directly to the fundamental forces governing the relationship between energy and matter. These phrases had been preserved in the deepest archives of flame lore, their meanings partially lost but their power intact, waiting for someone with sufficient understanding to unlock their full potential. As the great working approached its climax, the very air around the witch's domain began to thicken with power, the atmosphere itself becoming saturated with energies that made even the simplest flame burn with unusual intensity. The daughters reported strange dreams in which they witnessed fires that burned in colors that had no names, flames that seemed to sing with voices that spoke of creation and destruction intertwined in patterns too complex for conscious thought to follow. The moment chosen for the working was calculated to align with cosmic forces that occurred only once in every 1,000 years, a convergence of celestial influences that would provide additional power to supplement the energies being channeled through the ritual itself. The witch took her position at the center of the great pattern that had been carved into the laboratory floor, her red soul blazing with anticipation, as she prepared to unleash forces that would reshape the fundamental nature of reality. The initial phases of the working proceeded exactly as planned, creative energy flowing along the prescribed channels with mathematical precision, while the various components of the ritual responded to the witch's will with gratifying reliability. The new flame began to take shape in the specially prepared crucible, its light initially dim but growing stronger with each passing moment as more power was fed into the carefully structured transformation. For hours that felt like lifetimes, the witch maintained perfect control over forces that would have torn apart anyone whose understanding was less complete or whose will was less focused. Her daughters chanted the supporting incantations while monitoring the various parameters that needed to remain within acceptable ranges for the working to succeed. Their combined efforts, creating a symphony of controlled power that filled the laboratory with harmonies that seemed to emerge from the very structure of existence itself. The flame that grew within the crucible was unlike anything that had ever existed before, its light carrying hues that seemed to shift and dance according to principles that transcended the simple relationship between heat and illumination. This was fire as pure creative force, energy that had been refined through processes that removed every trace of limitation or constraint, leaving behind only the essential principle of transformation that could serve as the foundation for a new cosmic age. Yet, as the flame reached critical intensity and the witch prepared to complete the working that would establish it as a permanent replacement for the dying first flame, something went catastrophically wrong. The energies she had been so carefully controlling suddenly surged beyond the parameters that the ritual could contain, their power increasing not arithmetically, but exponentially, as feedback loops within the system began to amplify, rather than regulate the forces flowing through the laboratory. The new flame, rather than settling into the stable configuration that had been planned, began to exhibit characteristics that defied every theory the witch had developed about the nature of controlled combustion. Its light shifted from the planned golden radiance to a deep red that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life, while its heat increased to levels that threatened to melt the very stone that contained it. The witch's attempts to regain control over the runaway process only seemed to make the situation worse. Her efforts to channel the excess energy through emergency pathways, creating new instabilities that fed back into the primary, working in ways that amplified the chaos rather than resolving it. The carefully planned transformation was becoming a disaster of cosmic proportions. A creative working gone wrong on scales that threatened not just the laboratory, but the fundamental structure of reality itself. Her daughters, sensing the approaching catastrophe through their connection to the flame working, rushed to assist their mother in bringing the chaotic energies under control. Yet their intervention, well-intentioned though it was, only added more variables to a system that was already operating far beyond the boundaries of predictable behavior. The combined power of their souls, when added to the energies already circulating through the laboratory, pushed the unstable flame past the final threshold that separated controlled creation from absolute chaos. The explosion that followed was not merely physical but metaphysical, a detonation that occurred simultaneously in multiple dimensions as the failed working released energies that had been compressed and refined beyond any natural limit. The laboratory and the chambers surrounding it were instantly transformed into something that resembled the heart of a volcano, though the fires that filled them burned with the chaotic intensity of the chaos flame, rather than the predictable heat of ordinary combustion. The witch herself, standing at the center of the disaster she had inadvertently created, bore the full brunt of the transformative energies as they sought outlets for the power that could no longer be contained within the original structure of the working. Her form, which had maintained its divine beauty throughout all the centuries since she had claimed her Lord's soul, began to undergo changes that reflected the chaotic nature of the forces flowing through her. The transformation was not merely physical but fundamental, altering not just her appearance but the basic principles that governed her existence. Where once she had been a being of controlled, creative fire, she became something far more primal and dangerous. A nexus of chaotic energy that existed in a state of constant transformation, her form shifting between different configurations as the chaos flame sought to express itself through her altered nature. Her daughters, caught within the sphere of the transformation, found themselves changed as well, though each experienced the chaotic energies differently according to their individual natures and their proximity to the epicenter of the disaster. Some were altered in ways that preserved their essential selves while adding new dimensions to their existence, while others underwent transformations so profound that their original identities became almost unrecognizable beneath the changes wrought by exposure to pure chaos. The fair lady, whose sensitivity had made her particularly attuned to the subtle variations in flame, found herself transformed into something that embodied both creation and suffering in equal measure. Her connection to the chaotic energies left her able to perceive the pain and confusion of other beings touched by the chaos flame, a gift that was simultaneously a blessing and a curse that would define her existence for all the ages to come. Quelag's warrior nature proved more compatible with the chaotic transformations. Her strong will, allowing her to maintain more of her original identity, even as her form was altered to accommodate the new energies flowing through her. Yet even she found herself changed in fundamental ways, her lower body taking on characteristics that reflected the fusion of organic life with the mineral structures that had been warped by exposure to the chaos flame. Quelana, through a combination of distance from the epicenter and her technical understanding of flamecraft, managed to escape the worst effects of the transformation while retaining enough knowledge of what had occurred to understand both the magnitude of the disaster and the steps that would be necessary to prevent its expansion beyond the immediate area. Her survival would prove crucial in the days and years that followed, as she worked to contain the spread of chaos while preserving what could be saved from the wreckage of her mother's great work. The Witch of Izalith herself became something that could no longer be properly called by her original name, her transformed state earning her a new title that reflected both her changed nature and the catastrophe she had unleashed the bed of chaos. This new form was simultaneously magnificent and terrible, a living manifestation of creative force freed from all constraint, beautiful in its raw power, but deadly in its unpredictability. The domain that had once been her orderly kingdom of controlled flames became the demon ruins, a realm where the laws that govern normal combustion no longer applied, and where the chaotic energies continued to spawn new forms of life that reflected the unpredictable nature of their origin. Demons born from the chaos flame emerged from pools of molten rock, their forms combining elements of organic life with mineral structures in configurations that defied conventional understanding of what living creatures should look like. These demons were not evil in any conventional sense, but rather expressions of pure creative chaos, beings whose existence reflected the fundamental unpredictability that had been unleashed when the witch's careful working had exceeded the boundaries of controlled transformation. They possessed their own alien intelligence and their own purposes, though these often proved incompatible with the ordered structures that other forms of life had established in the world above. The spread of chaotic influence from the epicenter of the disaster threatened to destabilize the entire cosmic order that had been established through the claiming of the Lord's souls. The carefully maintained balance between different forms of power beginning to show signs of strain as the chaos flame's influence extended into regions that had never been designed to accommodate such unpredictable forces. Reports of the catastrophe reached Anor Londo through channels that carried news both mundane and cosmic, the disruption in the fundamental order proving impossible to conceal from those whose understanding encompassed the basic principles governing reality itself. Gwyn, whose lightning had proven so effective against the stone scales of dragons, found himself facing a challenge that could not be resolved through the application of divine force, a problem that required understanding of principles that operated beyond the realm of conventional warfare. The Lord of Sunlight's response to the crisis was swift and decisive, though the solution he chose carried implications that would echo through all the ages to come. Rather than attempting to restore the chaotic region to its original state, which his advisors deemed impossible given the fundamental nature of the transformation that had occurred, he chose instead to contain the spread of chaos through the application of divine power on a scale that had not been seen since the war against the everlasting dragons. The intervention required the creation of a new order of knights, warriors whose armor and weapons had been specially prepared to withstand the corrosive influence of the chaos flame while retaining enough offensive capability to battle the demons that continued to emerge from the transformed region. These Black Knights, as they came to be known, represented the finest warriors that Anor Londo could produce. Their silver armor, transformed through exposure to the cosmic forces involved in containing chaos. The black coloration of their equipment was not merely aesthetic but functional, the dark surface reflecting their adaptation to an environment where the normal rules of combat no longer applied, and where survival depended upon the ability to endure exposure to energies that would destroy ordinary materials within moments. Their weapons, forged from metals that had been treated with fragments of Gwyn's own lightning, possessed the power to wound even creatures born from pure chaos. The campaign that followed was unlike any military action that had been undertaken since the establishment of the Divine Kingdom, a conflict that took place not on conventional battlefields, but in regions where the very landscape shifted and changed, according to principles that defied tactical planning. The Black Knights fought their way through territories where molten rock flowed uphill and where the air itself burned with chaotic energy. Their advance measured not in distance covered, but in degrees of containment achieved. The battles themselves were exercises in controlled desperation, engagements where victory was defined not by the destruction of enemies, but by the successful prevention of further chaos expansion. The demons that emerged from the transformed region possessed abilities that seemed to violate every principle of combat that the knights had been trained to understand, their attacks carrying chaotic energies that could transform the very weapons used against them. Yet through persistence and sacrifice, through the application of divine authority backed by tactical brilliance and individual heroism beyond any reasonable expectation, the spread of chaos was gradually contained within boundaries that rendered it manageable, if not eliminable. The cost was measured not just in lives lost, but in the fundamental transformation of everything the containment effort touched, including the knights themselves, who found their nature altered by prolonged exposure to the forces they fought to contain. The establishment of the containment zone created a permanent scar across the landscape of the Divine Kingdom, a region where the normal rules no longer applied, and where constant vigilance was required to prevent the resumption of chaotic expansion. The demon ruins became a forbidden realm, accessible only to those whose duties required them to venture into territories where survival depended upon equipment and training that few possessed. The witch's great work had failed catastrophically, but from that failure had emerged new understanding of the forces that governed the relationship between order and chaos, knowledge that would prove crucial in the challenges that lay ahead as the first flame continued its slow but inevitable fade toward extinction. The Age of Fire had learned that even divine power had limits, that even the most carefully planned endeavors could produce consequences that exceeded all expectations, and that the price of cosmic ambition was sometimes measured in transformations that could never be undone. The chaos flame continued to burn in its contained realm, a constant reminder of both the potential and the peril that lay in attempts to manipulate the fundamental forces that governed reality itself. Its light, red and chaotic, served as a counterpoint to the golden radiance of the first flame, a testament to the complexity of forces that no single will, however divine, could hope to control completely. The containment of the chaos flame marked not an ending, but a turning point in the cosmic order, the first crack in the foundation of divine certainty that had supported the golden age of the gods since their victory over the everlasting dragons. In the aftermath of the witches' catastrophic failure, as the Black Knights maintained their vigilant guard over the demon-haunted ruins, and the transformed landscape slowly settled into its new configuration of controlled chaos, other signs began to manifest that the Age of Fire itself was entering a phase of decline that would test every assumption upon which the divine kingdom had been built. The first flame, that cosmic hearth from which all the wonders of the new age had emerged, continued its slow but inexorable fade toward extinction, its diminishing light creating ripple effects throughout the structure of reality that became increasingly difficult to ignore or explain away. The Lord's souls that had been drawn from its depths retained their power, but even they showed subtle signs of the same cosmic exhaustion, their radiance fractionally dimmed as the source from which they had been claimed slowly consumed the last of its original fuel. Yet the most disturbing consequence of the flame's decline was not the gradual dimming of divine power, but the corresponding strengthening of forces that had remained dormant throughout the centuries of light's dominion. The dark soul, that fragment of the first flame's power that had been claimed by the furtive pygmy in the ancient days when the Lord's souls were first discovered, began to manifest its true nature as the antithesis of everything the Age of Fire represented. Where Gwyn's soul blazed with the authority of divine lightning, and the witches had pulsed with creative flame before its transformation into chaos, the dark soul burned with a different kind of fire entirely, one that grew stronger as the light around it faded. This was not the absence of illumination, but its opposite, a fundamental force that existed in eternal tension with the principles that governed the ordered cosmos the gods had established. The pygmy who had first claimed this dark power had seemed the least significant of the four who had approached the first flame in the ancient days, his small stature and quiet demeanor marking him as someone unlikely to challenge the authority of beings whose souls blazed with obvious divine power. Yet as the centuries passed and the flame's light slowly weakened, the true implications of his choice began to reveal themselves in ways that transformed him from an forgotten footnote of history into a figure whose influence would eventually rival that of the gods themselves. The dark soul possessed a quality that set it apart from its blazing counterparts where the other Lord's souls remained concentrated within their original bearers. The dark power had the unique ability to fragment and reproduce itself, creating copies that retained the essential nature of the original, while adapting to the individual characteristics of those who claimed them. This reproductive quality meant that the dark soul's influence could spread exponentially, each fragment spawning others in an endless multiplication that promised to eventually outnumber all other forms of power. These fragments found their way into the beings that had emerged from the primordial humanity the pygmy represented, creatures who had seemed insignificant compared to the mighty dragons or the divine lords, but whose true potential had remained hidden until the cosmic balance began to shift in their favor. As the first flame's light dimmed, these humans began to manifest abilities that had been suppressed during the age when divine authority held unchallenged sway over the transformed world. The rise of human civilization during this period of cosmic transition represented something unprecedented in the history of the world. The emergence of a species that possessed individual will and ambition, while remaining connected to a collective source of power that transcended any single bearer. Unlike the gods, whose authority derived from their possession of unique Lord souls that could not be replicated or shared, humanity drew its strength from the infinitely divisible nature of the Dark Soul itself. Human kingdoms began to flourish in regions that had remained sparsely settled during the height of divine power, their growth accelerating as the cosmic balance shifted toward darkness, and the ambient energies that supported their development grew stronger with each passing year. These settlements were unlike the divine cities that had been built to reflect cosmic principles through architectural grandeur, instead growing organically from the practical needs and desires of beings whose mortality gave them a different relationship to time and change. The city of New Londo represented the pinnacle of human achievement during this golden age of dark ascendancy, a sprawling metropolis, built not on the soaring heights that the gods preferred, but in the depths where water and earth met in configurations that reflected humanity's connection to the primal forces from which they had emerged. The city's architecture spoke of minds that thought in terms of adaptation rather than domination, structures that worked with natural forces rather than imposing divine will upon the landscape. Within New Londo's flooded districts and canal-linked neighborhoods, a civilization flourished that embodied humanity's unique gifts, the ability to cooperate on massive scales while preserving individual identity, the capacity to adapt quickly to changing circumstances without losing essential cultural characteristics, and most importantly, the power to tap into the Dark Soul's infinite potential without losing their fundamental humanity in the process. The rulers of this great city were the Four Kings, human lords who had risen to positions of authority through combinations of political acumen, personal charisma, and most crucially, their ability to channel larger portions of the Dark Soul's power than their subjects could access. These were not gods in the sense that Gwyn and his peers understood divinity, but rather the first examples of what humanity could become when freed from the constraints that had limited their development during the age of divine dominance. Each of the Four Kings embodied different aspects of human potential, elevated to its highest expression, their individual personalities and governing philosophies, reflecting the diversity that was humanity's greatest strength, while their collective rule demonstrated the species' capacity for cooperation in pursuit of shared goals. Under their guidance, New Londo became not just a city but a symbol of what mortals could achieve when they embraced rather than feared the dark power that flowed within their souls. The first of these kings was a scholar ruler whose mastery of the dark arts had granted him insights into the fundamental nature of reality that rivaled those possessed by beings who had directly touched the Lord's souls. His libraries contained knowledge that had been gathered from sources throughout the known world, wisdom that encompassed not just practical matters of governance and warfare, but theoretical understanding of cosmic forces that most minds could not even begin to comprehend. The second king embodied the warrior tradition that had always been part of humanity's survival strategy, his skills in combat elevated through dark enhancement to levels that allowed him to stand as equal to any divine champion. His personal guard, selected from among the finest fighters the human kingdoms could produce, and trained in techniques that incorporated dark power into conventional martial arts, represented the emergence of humanity as a military force capable of challenging even divine authority when circumstances required such confrontation. The third king served as the spiritual leader of New Londo's population, his connection to the Dark Soul allowing him to guide others in the development of their own dark abilities while maintaining the moral and ethical framework necessary to prevent the power from corrupting those who wielded it. His temples offered not just religious instruction but practical training in the safe application of dark arts, ensuring that the city's growing mastery of these forces remained oriented toward constructive rather than destructive ends. The fourth king functioned as the economic and administrative heart of the growing human empire. His understanding of trade and resource management elevated through dark insight to levels that allowed New Londo to coordinate commercial and diplomatic relationships across vast distances. Under his guidance, human merchants began to establish trade networks that connected distant settlements while spreading the influence of dark-touched civilization throughout regions that had previously remained isolated and underdeveloped. Together, the four kings represented humanity's answer to divine rule, proof that mortal beings could achieve forms of authority and wisdom that did not depend upon proximity to cosmic forces beyond their understanding. Their success in establishing New Londo as a center of power that could rival even Anor Londo demonstrated that the age of unquestioned divine supremacy was drawing to its inevitable close. Yet the rise of human power and the spread of dark influence throughout the mortal kingdoms created tensions that extended far beyond mere political rivalry, touching upon fundamental questions about the nature of authority and the right of any single group to claim dominion over others. The gods who ruled from their celestial city found themselves facing not just competition but philosophical challenge to the assumptions upon which their entire system of governance had been built. The conflict between light and dark was not simply a matter of opposing forces, but reflected deeper disagreements about the direction the world should take, as the cosmic balance continued to shift away from the principles that had defined the Age of Fire. The divine faction, led by Gwyn's uncompromising vision of ordered hierarchy, believed that the established system of divine rule represented the highest form of civilization possible, and that any deviation from this model threatened to return the world to the chaos and stagnation that had characterized earlier ages. The human kingdoms, drawing their authority from the increasingly powerful Dark Soul, argued that the time had come for a new form of governance that reflected the reality of changing cosmic conditions, rather than clinging to arrangements that had been established under different circumstances. They pointed to their achievements in New Londo and other centers of human civilization as evidence that mortal rule could produce prosperity and justice without requiring divine intervention or oversight. The tension between these competing visions of the future created an atmosphere of growing crisis that affected every aspect of life throughout the known world, from the highest levels of cosmic politics to the daily concerns of ordinary individuals who found themselves caught between forces they could not fully understand or control. The stability that had characterized the golden age of divine rule gave way to uncertainty about fundamental questions that had seemed settled for centuries. In this atmosphere of cosmic uncertainty, tragedy struck the human kingdoms with a suddenness and severity that transformed political tension into existential crisis. The Abyss, a phenomenon that seemed to represent the Dark Soul's power freed from all constraint or moral guidance, began to manifest in locations where dark influence had grown strongest, creating zones of corruption that threatened to consume everything they touched. The nature of the Abyss defied easy explanation, existing as it did at the intersection of multiple cosmic principles that had never been intended to interact in such concentrated forms. It was darkness, not as the absence of light, but as a positive force that actively consumed illumination, order, and structure, reducing everything it encountered to a state that was neither existence nor void, but something altogether more disturbing. The first manifestation of the abyss occurred in New Londo itself, emerging from the deepest chambers of the city, where the four kings had established their most secret repositories of dark power and forbidden knowledge. The transformation began slowly, almost imperceptibly, as shadows in certain chambers began to exhibit behavior that violated conventional understanding of how light and darkness interacted with physical surfaces. These shadows moved independently of the objects that cast them, writhed with life that seemed to come from sources beyond the physical realm, and gradually began to expand beyond the boundaries that should have contained them. The scholars who first observed these phenomena attempted to study and catalogue them according to established principles of dark arts research, not initially recognizing that they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in the history of the world. The four kings themselves, despite their mastery of dark power and their deep understanding of the forces they had spent decades learning to control, found themselves facing a crisis that exceeded their ability to comprehend or manage. The abyss that emerged from their most secure chambers seemed to embody not just the power they had been wielding, but something far more fundamental and dangerous: the dark soul itself, freed from the constraints that had kept it compatible with ordered existence. The corruption spread through New Londo with a speed that defied every effort at containment, the abyss transforming not just the physical structures of the great city, but the very nature of space and time within the affected areas. Passages that had once led from one district to another now opened onto voids that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, while chambers that had contained the city's greatest treasures became portals to realms where conventional concepts of reality no longer applied. The citizens of New Londo found themselves trapped within a metropolis that was rapidly becoming something other than the familiar home they had known, their attempts to escape hindered by the fact that the streets and waterways they had navigated all their lives now led to destinations that existed beyond the boundaries of the comprehensible world. Those who ventured too close to the spreading zones of abyss influence reported experiences that language proved inadequate to describe, visions of infinite darkness, populated by entities that defied classification, sounds that seemed to come from within their own minds, sensations that suggested the dissolution of individual identity itself. The four kings, realizing that their city and their people faced annihilation from forces they had inadvertently unleashed through their mastery of dark arts, made the desperate decision to embrace the abyss rather than resist it, believing that they could somehow maintain their authority and protect their subjects by accepting transformation rather than fighting against it. This choice, born from love for their people and desperation born of impossible circumstances, led to their own corruption as they allowed the abyss to flow through their souls in exchange for the power to shape its influence. The transformation of the four kings marked the complete fall of New Londo to abyss corruption, the great human city becoming something that could no longer be properly described as a settlement inhabited by mortal beings. The structures remained, twisted and changed, but still recognizable, while the waterways continued to flow, though they now carried currents of darkness rather than ordinary liquid. Yet the civilization that had flourished there was gone, replaced by something that existed according to principles that bore no relationship to human values or aspirations. The loss of New Londo sent shockwaves throughout the human kingdoms, the destruction of their greatest achievement serving as a terrible warning about the dangers inherent in the dark power that had seemed to promise unlimited potential for growth and development. Other centers of human civilization began to experience similar phenomena as the abyss spread beyond its original manifestation, though in most cases the corruption moved slowly enough to allow evacuation and containment efforts. Yet the true horror of the New Londo catastrophe lay not in its immediate effects, but in the implications it revealed about the cosmic forces that were reshaping the world. As the Age of Fire entered its twilight phase, the Abyss represented not an external threat that could be defeated through conventional means, but the inevitable consequence of the Dark Soul's growing power as the first flame's light continued to fade, a preview of what awaited all existence if the cosmic balance shifted too far toward darkness. The tragedy at Ulasil represented another manifestation of the same fundamental crisis, though in this case the Abyss emerged not from deliberate cultivation of dark power, but from misguided attempts to study and understand forces that were beyond mortal comprehension. This ancient settlement, known for its scholarly traditions and peaceful approach to magical research, had established contact with something that dwelt in the deepest places beneath the earth, a being of such power and malevolence that even brief exposure to its influence proved sufficient to corrupt an entire civilization. Manus, father of the Abyss, embodied the Dark Soul's potential for corruption when freed from all constraint or moral guidance, his very existence serving as proof that the power which promised to elevate humanity to divine status could just as easily reduce them to something less than the beasts that roamed the transformed wilderness. His awakening in the depths beneath Ulasil sent waves of abyss corruption throughout the settlement, transforming its scholars and mages into creatures that retained human intelligence, while losing every trace of human compassion or restraint. The scholars of Ulasil, in their eagerness to unlock the secrets of dark power, had performed experiments that brought them into contact with forces they were not prepared to understand or control. Their magical research, initially focused on benevolent applications of dark arts that could improve the lives of their people, gradually evolved to encompass investigations into the fundamental nature of the Dark Soul itself and the principles that governed its interaction with other cosmic forces. The rituals they developed to establish communication with Manus were masterpieces of theoretical magic, incorporating insights drawn from every tradition of dark arts that had developed since the first humans began to manifest their connection to the Dark Soul's power. Yet their very sophistication proved to be their undoing, as the forces they successfully contacted proved far more dangerous than their theories had suggested possible. Manus himself was something that predated human civilization, a being whose connection to the Dark Soul ran so deep that he had become a living embodiment of its most primal and destructive aspects. His corruption of Ulasil was not deliberate malice, but rather the inevitable consequence of his nature expressing itself in contact with minds that lacked the strength or wisdom necessary to resist his influence. The transformation of Ulasil's population into creatures of the Abyss represented a tragedy that echoed the fall of New Londo while adding new dimensions of horror to the growing crisis. Where the four kings had retained some semblance of their original personalities even after their corruption, the scholars of Ulasil were transformed into beings that bore no resemblance to their former selves, their intellectual gifts perverted into instruments of corruption that served to spread the Abyss's influence throughout the surrounding countryside. Knight Artorius, the Abyss Walker, greatest of Gwyn's champions and the warrior whose courage had made him legendary even among the divine knights of Anor Londo, received the mission to investigate the crisis at Ulasil and determine what steps could be taken to prevent the spread of abyss corruption beyond the boundaries of the affected settlement. His reputation for valor, in the face of impossible odds, made him the natural choice for such a dangerous undertaking, while his mastery of combat techniques specifically developed to counter dark influence gave him the best possible chance of success. The knight who rode toward Ulasil carried with him not just his own legendary skills, but the hopes and prayers of everyone who understood the implications of allowing the abyss to spread unchecked throughout the mortal kingdoms. His armor blazed with protective enchantments that had been woven by the finest artificers of Anor Londo, while his sword bore blessings that would allow it to wound even creatures born from pure darkness. Yet for all his preparation and all his legendary prowess, Artorias found himself facing challenges that exceeded even his exceptional capabilities. The abyss corruption that had claimed Ulasil proved resistant to conventional combat techniques, existing as it did on multiple levels simultaneously and striking not just at the physical body but at the soul itself, seeking to transform rather than simply destroy those it encountered. The battles he fought in the corrupted settlement tested every aspect of his training and experience, forcing him to develop new strategies and tactics while maintaining the moral clarity necessary to resist the insidious influence that sought to claim him as it had claimed the scholars he had come to save. Each victory came at tremendous personal cost, the exposure to abyss corruption slowly but inevitably taking its toll on even his exceptional resistance. The final tragedy of Artorias' mission came when his desire to protect his beloved wolf companion, Sif, led him to make the ultimate sacrifice, allowing the abyss to claim him in exchange for preserving the innocence of the creature he loved more than his own life. This act of selfless love, while noble beyond measure, resulted in the corruption of Anor Londo's greatest champion, transforming him into one of the very creatures he had been sent to destroy. The fall of Artorias marked the end of divine confidence in their ability to contain the spreading darkness through conventional military action. The corruption of their finest knight serving as proof that even the most exceptional individuals could succumb to forces that operated beyond the realm of physical combat. The Abyss had demonstrated its power to transform rather than simply destroy, claiming for its own cause the very champions sent to oppose it. The growing strength of dark forces throughout the mortal kingdoms created a crisis that threatened the foundations of divine rule, while offering no clear path toward resolution that did not involve risks comparable to those that had already produced such devastating consequences. The gods found themselves facing not just political opposition, but cosmic forces that seemed to grow stronger with each passing year as the first flame continued its inevitable fade toward extinction. The age of easy divine supremacy was drawing to its close, replaced by an era of uncertainty and conflict in which the outcome of struggles between light and dark would determine not just the fate of kingdoms, but the fundamental nature of reality itself. The spreading darkness promised transformation beyond anything the world had ever experienced, while the fading light fought desperately to preserve the order and beauty it had taken centuries to establish and perfect. The crisis that had begun with the spread of the Abyss and the corruption of humanity's greatest achievements now forced Gwyn to confront a reality that challenged everything he had believed about the nature of divine authority and the permanence of the order he had worked so tirelessly to establish. The Lord of Sunlight, whose lightning had once shattered the stone scales of immortal dragons and whose will had shaped the very foundations of the Age of Fire, found himself facing enemies that could not be defeated through conventional warfare and problems that defied solution through the application of divine power. The reports that reached Anor Londo through increasingly desperate channels painted a picture of cosmic transformation that exceeded even the most pessimistic projections about the consequences of the First Flame's gradual decline. The Abyss was not merely spreading, but evolving, its influence adapting to local conditions and finding new ways to corrupt and transform everything it touched. Entire regions that had been centers of human civilization were becoming uninhabitable zones where reality itself operated according to principles that bore no relationship to the ordered cosmos the gods had established. The corruption of Artorias, that paragon of divine knighthood whose courage and skill had made him the pride of Anor Londo's military forces, served as the most devastating proof that conventional responses to the crisis were not merely inadequate, but potentially counterproductive. If even their greatest champion could fall to the seductive influence of the abyss, what hope remained for lesser warriors or ordinary citizens who lacked his exceptional training and moral fortitude? Princess Guinevere, whose radiant beauty and diplomatic wisdom had made her the most beloved member of the royal family, was among the first to recognize that the traditional strategies that had served divine rule so well in the past were proving insufficient to address the unprecedented challenges of the present moment. Her insights into the political dimensions of the crisis, combined with her understanding of the human hearts and minds that were proving so vulnerable to dark corruption, led her to conclusions that filled even her optimistic nature with profound unease. The princess understood better than many of her divine peers that the spread of darkness was not simply a military problem that could be resolved through the deployment of superior force, but represented a fundamental shift in the cosmic balance that required responses operating on scales that transcended conventional governance or warfare. The humans who were embracing dark power were not doing so out of malice or rebellion against divine authority, but because the changing cosmic conditions made such power increasingly attractive and accessible to minds seeking solutions to problems that divine rule had proven unable to address. Her analysis of the situation, presented to the Divine Council in sessions that stretched through nights filled with desperate debate and painful recognition of diminishing options, painted a picture of inevitable transformation that challenged every assumption upon which the Age of Fire had been built. The choice facing the gods was not between victory and defeat in any conventional sense, but between adaptation to changing circumstances and rigid adherence to principles that might no longer be compatible with cosmic realities. Yet Princess Guinevere's wisdom, however profound her insights might be, was but one voice in deliberations that involved beings whose perspectives had been shaped by centuries of unchallenged authority and whose commitment to established order ran deeper than personal preference or political calculation. The divine court of Anor Londo represented not just individuals but the embodiment of cosmic principles that had governed reality since the defeat of the everlasting dragons, and any admission that those principles might require fundamental revision threatened to undermine the very foundations of their identity and purpose. Prince Gwyndolin, whose mastery of lunar magic and illusion had always marked him as different from his more straightforward divine siblings, possessed insights into the crisis that his unique nature made him particularly qualified to understand. His connection to forces that operated in the shadows and margins of divine authority granted him perspectives that complemented his sister's political wisdom while extending into realms that she, for all her intelligence, could not fully penetrate. The prince's understanding of illusion as both art and necessity had taught him that reality itself was far more malleable and subjective than most beings realized, that the apparent solidity of established order depended upon collective agreement to maintain certain assumptions about the nature of existence. The spread of the abyss represented not just corruption but revelation, the exposure of truths about cosmic forces that had been hidden beneath layers of divine propaganda and wishful thinking. His magical investigations into the nature of darkness had revealed disturbing parallels between abyss corruption and the techniques he himself used to maintain the illusions that preserved Anor Londo's appearance of eternal prosperity and divine confidence. Both involved the manipulation of perception and the substitution of desired images for uncomfortable realities. Though the abyss operated on scales and with purposes that exceeded anything in his own repertoire of lunar sorcery, the third member of Gwyn's family, the prince whose name would eventually be stricken from all official records and whose very existence would become a source of shame that could not be acknowledged or discussed, represented perhaps the most tragic casualty of the cosmic crisis that was reshaping the divine kingdom. The nameless king, whose mastery of lightning had rivaled his father's own, and whose love of honorable combat had made him a figure of legend, even among the gods themselves, found his fundamental values irreconcilably at odds with the desperate measures that the spreading darkness seemed to demand. The Nameless King's philosophy of warfare emphasized honor, courage, and the nobility that could be found in facing worthy opponents in battles where both sides fought according to codes that elevated conflict above mere violence. His dragons, tamed through mutual respect rather than domination, embodied his belief that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy enemies, but in the wisdom to recognize when former foes could become trusted allies. This worldview, which had served him well during the war against the everlasting dragons and the subsequent conflicts that had established divine authority throughout the known world, proved increasingly incompatible with his father's growing willingness to employ methods that sacrificed honor in favor of efficiency. The prince's objections to strategies that treated mortal populations as expendable resources rather than subjects deserving protection created tensions that went far beyond mere disagreement about tactics. The philosophical divide between father and son reflected deeper questions about the nature of authority and the responsibilities that accompanied power, issues that took on cosmic significance as the crisis deepened, and the range of acceptable responses narrowed toward options that would have been unthinkable during the golden age of divine rule. The Nameless King's insistence on maintaining standards of conduct that honored the traditions of noble warfare seemed increasingly naive to those who saw extinction as the alternative to pragmatic compromise. The final break between Gwyn and his eldest son came when the Lord of Sunlight announced his intention to implement measures that would fundamentally alter the nature of human existence in order to prevent the complete triumph of darkness over the established cosmic order. The undead curse, as this intervention came to be known, represented divine power operating on scales that had not been seen since the war against the dragons, a transformation of the basic conditions governing mortal life that would affect every human being throughout the known world. The curse was designed to address the fundamental problem that had made humans so vulnerable to abyss, corruption, their mortality, which created desperation that made dark power's promises of transcendence irresistibly attractive to minds facing the inevitability of death. By altering the relationship between life and death for all of humanity, Gwyn sought to remove the primary motivation that drove mortals to seek power in sources that threatened the stability of the cosmic order. The dark sign that marked those affected by the curse served as both symbol and mechanism of their transformed condition, a brand burned into the soul itself that prevented the normal transition from life to death while replacing it with something far more complex and disturbing. Those who bore the sign would not die in any conventional sense, but would instead undergo a gradual process of hollowing that stripped away personality, memory, and individual identity while preserving the basic functions necessary for continued existence. This transformation was not immediate, but progressive, allowing the cursed individuals to maintain their humanity for extended periods while slowly losing the characteristics that made them vulnerable to dark corruption. The process could be slowed or temporarily reversed through various means, but it could not be permanently stopped, ensuring that all humans would eventually reach a state where they posed no threat to cosmic stability while remaining capable of fulfilling their roles in the divine order. The implementation of the undead curse required divine power on a scale that exceeded anything Gwyn had attempted since the linking of the first flame, the transformation of an entire species demanding resources that left him visibly diminished, even by the standards of beings whose authority derived from contact with cosmic forces. The effort of reaching into the souls of every human throughout the known world and altering the fundamental principles that govern their existence aged him in ways that went beyond mere physical fatigue. The nameless king's horror at his father's decision to impose such a fate upon an entire species without their consent or knowledge created a rift that could not be bridged through argument or compromise. The prince's belief in honor and the dignity that all conscious beings deserved made it impossible for him to remain associated with actions that he viewed as fundamentally corrupt, regardless of the noble intentions that might have motivated them. His departure from Anor Londo represented not just personal estrangement, but philosophical rejection of everything the divine kingdom had become in its desperate struggle to maintain control over cosmic forces that were slipping beyond any single authority's ability to direct or contain. The nameless king chose exile over complicity, abandoning his birthright and his position as heir to divine authority, rather than remaining associated with policies that violated his deepest convictions about right and wrong. The official erasure of his name and the prohibition against mentioning his existence represented Gwyn's attempt to remove any reminder of the moral compromises that the crisis had forced upon divine rule, though the empty throne in the Great Hall and the silence where his voice should have been heard in council meetings served as constant reminders of what had been lost in the struggle to preserve what remained. Princess Guinevere's response to the crisis took a different form, but represented an equally profound rejection of the path her father had chosen to follow in his desperate attempt to maintain divine authority over a world that was transforming in ways that made traditional forms of rule increasingly impossible to sustain. Rather than open rebellion or philosophical confrontation, she chose the subtler, but no less definitive course of simply departing Anor Londo for destinations unknown. The princess's leaving was announced not as exile or banishment, but as a diplomatic mission to establish relationships with distant kingdoms and explore possibilities for extending divine influence into regions that had remained beyond the reach of traditional governance. This official explanation provided a face-saving narrative that allowed both sides to avoid the painful acknowledgement that divine unity had been shattered by disagreements about fundamental principles. Yet those who understood the true situation recognized her departure for what it actually represented: a quiet rejection of the increasingly desperate measures that her father was implementing in his struggle to prevent the complete collapse of the cosmic order he had worked so long to establish and maintain. Her absence from the divine court removed one of the few voices that had consistently advocated for approaches that honored the dignity and autonomy of the mortal populations whose fate was being decided without their participation or consent. The loss of both his children to different forms of rejection and abandonment left Gwyn increasingly isolated within the divine court, surrounded by advisors and supporters whose loyalty was unquestionable, but whose perspectives were shaped by the same assumptions and limitations that had made adaptation to changing circumstances so difficult for divine rule in general. The voices that might have offered alternative approaches to the crisis had been silenced through departure rather than opposition, leaving the Lord of Sunlight to face the darkening world with counsel drawn primarily from those who shared his commitment to preserving established order regardless of the cost. Prince Gwyndolin's position during this period of family disintegration was particularly complex, his unique nature and abilities making him valuable to his father's increasingly desperate plans, while his understanding of illusion and deception made him acutely aware of the costs that such strategies would exact from everyone involved. His decision to remain in Anor Londo when his siblings chose different forms of departure represented not uncritical support for his father's policies, but recognition that someone needed to preserve what could be saved from the father's wreckage of divine civilization. The prince's mastery of lunar magic allowed him to maintain illusions that concealed the growing emptiness of the divine city from visitors who might otherwise have recognized the extent to which cosmic authority had been compromised. by the departure of key figures and the failure of traditional approaches to address the spreading crisis. His work in creating false images of prosperity and confidence served purposes that went beyond mere propaganda, providing psychological support for those who needed to believe that divine authority remained intact and effective. Yet, the maintenance of such extensive illusions required constant effort and attention, drawing upon resources that might otherwise have been devoted to addressing the underlying problems that made deception necessary in the first place. Gwyn found himself trapped in a cycle where the energy needed to preserve appearances prevented him from developing genuine solutions, while the absence of real progress made the continuation of illusions increasingly essential to prevent complete collapse of morale and confidence. The flooding of New Londo represented perhaps the most extreme example of the desperate measures that divine rule was willing to employ in order to prevent the spread of abyss corruption beyond the boundaries where it had already established itself. The decision to destroy an entire city in order to contain the dark forces that had claimed it demonstrated both the severity of the threat that the abyss represented and the lengths to which the gods were prepared to go in their efforts to preserve cosmic order. The implementation of this policy required not just the physical destruction of the great human metropolis, but the sacrifice of thousands of innocent lives, citizens who had played no role in the events that had brought corruption to their home, but who were deemed expendable in the larger struggle to prevent darkness from claiming additional victories. The moral weight of this decision was staggering, even by the standards of beings whose perspectives encompassed cosmic rather than merely human scales of consideration. The sealers who carried out the actual flooding were members of a specialized order whose mastery of water magic and sealing techniques made them uniquely qualified for the terrible work that needed to be accomplished. These individuals understood better than most the implications of what they were being asked to do. Their knowledge of the forces involved making them acutely aware of both the necessity of their actions and the profound moral compromises that such necessity demanded. The ritual that brought the waters crashing down upon New Londo was a masterpiece of coordinated magic that required precise timing and flawless execution to achieve the desired effect of containment without allowing the corruption to escape into the surrounding countryside during the moments when the barriers between different sections of the city were temporarily weakened. The sealers worked with the grim efficiency of surgeons performing amputations, their focus on technical precision serving as psychological defense against the horror of what they were accomplishing. The success of the flooding in terms of its primary objective, the containment of abyss corruption within boundaries that prevented its further spread, came at a cost that extended far beyond the immediate loss of life and property. The destruction of humanity's greatest city sent shockwaves throughout the mortal kingdoms, serving as unmistakable proof that divine rule was willing to sacrifice entire populations rather than risk the possibility of cosmic transformation beyond their ability to control. The creation of the Dark Wraiths as an unintended consequence of the flooding added another layer of tragedy to an operation that had already pushed the boundaries of moral acceptability beyond any recognizable limits. These corrupted spirits, born from the intersection of dark power with the desperate desire of drowning souls to survive their fate, represented the emergence of new forms of existence that combined human intelligence with supernatural abilities and an insatiable hunger for the life force that had been denied to them. The Dark Wraith's ability to invade other realms and drain the humanity from living beings made them a threat that extended far beyond the flooded ruins of their origin, their existence serving as a constant reminder that even successful containment operations could produce consequences that exceeded their intended scope. Their raids into distant lands spread fear and suffering while demonstrating that the abyss could find ways to extend its influence even from behind the barriers that had been erected to contain it. The establishment of the undead curse as a universal condition affecting all of humanity represented the culmination of Gwyn's strategy for addressing the crisis that threatened to destroy everything the Age of Fire had accomplished. This transformation of the basic conditions governing mortal existence was designed to address not just the immediate problem of abyss corruption, but the longer-term issue of human potential as a challenge to divine authority. The curse operated through mechanisms that went deeper than physical alteration, reaching into the fundamental relationship between soul and body that defined the nature of conscious existence itself. The dark sign that marked the cursed served as both symbol and instrument of their transformed condition, a brand that connected each individual to a vast network of cosmic influence that could monitor and control their development according to principles that served divine rather than human interests. The progressive nature of the hollowing process allowed for gradual adjustment to the new conditions while preserving enough human characteristics to maintain social stability during the transition period. Those in the early stages of the curse could continue to function as productive members of their communities while slowly losing the ambition and creativity that had made them prone to seeking power in dangerous sources. The mechanisms built into the curse for temporary reversal through contact with other cursed individuals or certain forms of spiritual activity served multiple purposes, providing hope that prevented complete despair, while ensuring that any improvement in condition remained dependent upon systems that ultimately served divine interests rather than human autonomy. The cursed could maintain their humanity only through constant effort and cooperation, conditions that made organized resistance to divine authority virtually impossible to sustain. Yet, the implementation of such a far-reaching transformation of human nature required divine power on a scale that left Gwyn visibly diminished, his lightning less brilliant and his voice less commanding, as the enormous effort of reshaping an entire species drained resources that had taken centuries to accumulate. The Lord of Sunlight aged before the eyes of those who served him, his divine nature proving insufficient to bear the weight of cosmic intervention without paying a price that went beyond mere fatigue. The success of the undead curse in achieving its immediate objectives, the prevention of further abyss outbreaks, and the reduction of human threat to cosmic stability came at costs that extended far beyond the obvious moral compromises. Involved in transforming an entire species without their consent, the operation left divine authority weakened and isolated, dependent upon increasingly desperate measures to maintain control over a world that was changing in ways that made traditional forms of rule progressively less viable. The Age of Fire was entering its final phase, though few recognized the signs that marked the transition from vigorous authority to desperate preservation of what could be saved from the ruins of cosmic ambition. The gods still ruled from their celestial city, but their rule increasingly resembled the actions of a besieged garrison, rather than the confident governance of beings whose authority derived from cosmic mandate and unlimited power. The measures that Gwyn had implemented in his desperate struggle to preserve the cosmic order, the exile of his children, the flooding of New Londo, the cursing of all humanity had succeeded in their immediate objectives of containing the spread of darkness and preventing the complete collapse of divine authority. Yet they had also left the Lord of Sunlight facing a reality that was perhaps more terrible than the chaos he had fought so hard to prevent. The world he had saved was no longer the world he had sought to preserve, and the authority he maintained was purchased at a price that had transformed him from a beloved ruler into something approaching a tyrant, whose subjects endured his governance only because the alternative seemed even more frightening. The divine city of Anor Londo, once the shining crown jewel of cosmic civilization, where gods and mortals alike had gathered to witness the flowering of order and beauty beyond imagination, had become a hollow shell of its former magnificence, its corridors echoing with the footsteps of silver knights who maintained their posts with mechanical precision, while their master grew ever more isolated in chambers that had once hosted celebrations of divine achievement. The laughter that had once filled the great halls had been replaced by silence, broken only by the distant sounds of machinery and the whispered consultations of advisors, whose counsel grew increasingly desperate as the options available to divine rule continued to narrow. Prince Gwyn, the sole remaining member of the royal family who had chosen to stay within the divine city during its period of greatest crisis, found himself bearing responsibilities that had never been intended for his unique nature and abilities, his mastery of lunar magic and illusion becoming the primary tool through which Londo maintained its appearance of continued prosperity and divine confidence. The prince's work in creating and maintaining false images of his departed siblings allowed visitors to the city to believe that the royal family remained intact and united, while his manipulation of light and shadow concealed the growing emptiness that had settled over chambers once filled with divine activity. Yet, even Gwyn's considerable skills in the arts of deception were proving insufficient to conceal the fundamental changes that were occurring within his father as the accumulated strain of cosmic governance under impossible conditions continued to exact its toll on divine nature itself. Gwyn's lightning, once brilliant enough to illuminate entire battlefields and pierce the stone scales of immortal dragons, now flickered with uncertain radiance that spoke of power sources depleted beyond any hope of full recovery. While his voice, which had once carried the authority to reshape the very foundations of reality, grew hollow and distant, as if emerging from depths that mortal ears could barely perceive. The Lord of Sunlight's physical form began to show signs of the cosmic exhaustion that had been building within him since the implementation of the undead curse, his divine flesh growing pale and insubstantial, while his eyes took on the quality of flames that had burned too long and consumed too much of their original fuel. Those who had known him during the golden age of his authority found it increasingly difficult to reconcile the diminished figure who now occupied the throne of Londo with the radiant being whose presence had once seemed to embody the very concept of divine power made manifest in physical form. The reports that reached the divine court through increasingly unreliable channels painted a picture of a world that was slowly but inexorably sliding toward a state of cosmic entropy that threatened to undo everything the Age of Fire had accomplished since the defeat of the everlasting dragons. The first flame continued its relentless fade toward extinction, its diminishing light creating cascading effects throughout the structure of reality that manifested as increasingly frequent and severe disruptions in the natural order that divine authority had worked so hard to establish and maintain. The human kingdoms, constrained by the undead curse, but not entirely pacified by its effects, existed in a state of perpetual twilight, where the living struggled to maintain their humanity, while the cursed wandered through landscapes that had become increasingly hostile to all forms of conscious existence. The settlements that had once flourished under divine protection now resembled fortified camps where survivors huddled together for mutual protection against threats that seemed to multiply with each passing season. The spreading influence of hollow corruption, an unintended consequence of the curse that had been designed to prevent far worse forms of transformation, created new categories of threat that divine authority had never anticipated, and for which existing responses proved inadequate or counterproductive. These mindless shells of former humans retained enough physical capability to pose dangers to the living while lacking any trace of the consciousness or moral restraint that might have made negotiation or rehabilitation possible. The undead who retained their sanity found themselves trapped between the hollow fate that awaited them if they surrendered to despair, and the constant struggle required to maintain their humanity in a world that seemed designed to strip away everything that made existence meaningful or worthwhile. Their pilgrimage to locations where they might find temporary respite from the curse's effects created new patterns of migration and settlement that disrupted the stable social structures that had supported civilization during more prosperous times. Yet it was not the immediate suffering of cursed humanity or the gradual decay of mortal civilization that finally drove Gwyn to contemplate the ultimate sacrifice that would define the final chapter of his reign, but rather the growing certainty that the First Flame's extinction would bring consequences that extended far beyond the collapse of his own authority or even the end of the Age of Fire itself. The cosmic balance that had been established through the claiming of the Lord's souls was dependent upon the flame's continued existence, and its final extinction would result in the return of the grey fog and timeless stagnation that had characterized the Age of Ancients. The prospect of such a regression filled the Lord of Sunlight with horror that transcended personal attachment to power or authority, representing as it did the negation of everything that consciousness and will had accomplished. Since the first touch of divine influence had introduced disparity into the world's ancient equilibrium, the beauty and meaning that had been discovered through struggle and sacrifice would be lost as surely as if they had never existed, while the potential for growth and transformation that had made the Age of Fire worth preserving would disappear into the grey uniformity that recognized no distinction between achievement and failure, nobility and degradation, love and indifference. The solution that began to form in Gwyn's mind as he contemplated this ultimate catastrophe was one that would require him to sacrifice not merely his authority or his comfort, but his very existence, transforming himself from a ruler who governed through the exercise of power into something that would serve as a permanent source of the cosmic energy needed to sustain the flames burning. The Lord's soul that had made him divine contained within itself enough concentrated power to fuel the first flame for extended periods, though the process would consume his consciousness and identity as surely as any fire consumes the material that feeds its burning. The decision to link the fire represented not just personal sacrifice but philosophical transformation, the final evolution of divine authority from external governance of cosmic forces to complete identification with the principles that had originally justified such governance. Gwyn would cease to exist as an individual being capable of choice and change, becoming instead a permanent component of the cosmic machinery that maintained the conditions necessary for continued existence of everything he had worked to protect and preserve. The preparations for this ultimate sacrifice required him to consider aspects of cosmic mechanics that had remained theoretical throughout all the centuries of his rule. Questions about the relationship between consciousness and energy that touched upon the deepest mysteries of existence itself. The linking process would not simply add his power to the flame's reserves, but would fundamentally alter the nature of both, creating a new form of cosmic fire that partook of divine will while operating according to principles that transcended individual personality or desire. The journey to the kiln of the first flame represented a pilgrimage that retraced the path from divine authority to cosmic source, a return to the origins of power that had begun with the discovery of the Lord Souls in the depths beneath the ancient world. The route that Gwyn followed took him through regions of reality that existed at the intersection of multiple dimensions, spaces where the boundary between physical location and metaphysical principle became increasingly difficult to distinguish or maintain. The passage through these transitional realms stripped away the accumulated layers of identity and association that had defined his existence during the ages of active rule, reducing him step by step to the essential core of divine purpose that had originally motivated his claim upon the Lord's soul. The memories of battles fought and victories won, the relationships that had given meaning to centuries of experience, the very sense of self that had made him Gwyn, rather than simply an embodiment of cosmic principle, all of these began to fade, like morning mist, as he approached the source from which everything he had become had originally emerged. The kiln itself existed in a state that defied conventional description, a space that was simultaneously the physical location where the first flame burned and the metaphysical center around which all cosmic forces organized themselves according to the fundamental principles that governed the relationship between light and darkness, order and chaos, existence and void. The architecture of this sacred space reflected not mortal concepts of beauty or utility, but the mathematical relationships that define the structure of reality at its most basic level. Within the kiln's central chamber, the first flame flickered with the uncertain radiance of a fire that had consumed nearly all of its original fuel, its light dim and irregular compared to the brilliant conflagration that had once blazed with the power to transform entire worlds. Yet even in its diminished state, the flame retained the essential characteristics that had made it the foundation of everything the Age of Fire had accomplished, the cosmic hearth around which all the wonders of divine civilization had been built. The moment of linking itself occurred not through any dramatic gesture or elaborate ritual, but through the simple act of stepping forward into the flame's embrace, allowing its hungry tongues to begin the process of transformation that would convert divine consciousness into the fuel needed to sustain cosmic order for another age. The sensation was not one of burning in any conventional sense, but of dissolution, the gradual release of individual identity into something larger and more fundamental than personal existence. Gwyn's consciousness did not disappear immediately, but underwent a process of expansion and transformation that allowed him to experience, for the first and final time, direct perception of the cosmic forces he had spent so many centuries trying to understand and control. He saw the intricate web of relationships that connected every spark of life and every fragment of matter throughout the known universe, felt the delicate balance of tensions that maintained the stability necessary for continued existence, and understood at last the true magnitude of the responsibility he had assumed when he first claimed dominion over the forces that shaped reality itself. The linking process transformed the first flame from a source of energy that existed independently of conscious will into something that partook of divine purpose, while operating according to principles that transcended individual desire or understanding. The new fire that emerged from this fusion burned with steady radiance that promised to endure for ages yet to come, its light carrying within it traces of the authority and wisdom that had once defined the Lord of Sunlight's approach to cosmic governance. Yet the being who had been Gwyn ceased to exist in any meaningful sense, his consciousness dispersed throughout the transformed flame, in ways that made individual thought or emotion impossible, while preserving certain essential characteristics that would influence the fire's behavior throughout all the Thebes fires, centuries of its enhanced burning. The sacrifice was complete and irreversible. Divine authority dissolved into cosmic service that would continue long after the personal motivations that had inspired it were forgotten by everyone who had known them. The immediate effects of the linking were felt throughout the known world, as the first flame's renewed vitality sent waves of stabilizing energy through every system that depended upon its power for continued operation. The cosmic balance that had been growing increasingly precarious as the flame dimmed was restored to sustainable levels, while the various forms of corruption and decay that had been spreading as entropy gained ground over order found their advance halted by the restoration of fundamental forces that supported the continued existence of structured reality. The undead curse that had been implemented as a desperate measure to prevent human ambition from destabilizing cosmic order revealed new dimensions. As it became integrated with the enhanced flame's influence, the transformation that had once been designed to limit mortal potential, now serving as a mechanism that could channel human will toward purposes that supported, rather than threatened, the continuation of the Age of Fire. The cursed found that their condition, while still carrying the risk of hollow transformation, now also offered possibilities for meaning and purpose that had not existed during the initial implementation of Gwyn's final policy. The establishment of the chosen undead tradition emerged as one of the most significant long-term consequences of the linking, a system that would guide exceptional individuals among the cursed toward the kiln of the first flame whenever the enhanced fire began to dim toward levels that threatened cosmic stability. These pilgrims would face trials and challenges that tested their worthiness while preparing them for the ultimate sacrifice that the continuation of the Age of Fire demanded from each generation. The undead asylums that were constructed throughout the mortal kingdoms served multiple functions within this new system, providing secure locations where the cursed could be contained until their potential for service to the greater cosmic order could be properly evaluated. Those who showed signs of exceptional capability or unusual resistance to hollow corruption would be selected for training that prepared them for roles as potential successors to Gwyn's ultimate sacrifice, while others would be maintained in conditions that minimized the threat they posed to social stability. The bells that were installed in various locations throughout the known world served as calling mechanisms that would summon chosen undead to their destiny when cosmic conditions required renewal of the first flame's power through fresh linking sacrifice. The ringing of these bells created resonances that penetrated the consciousness of those selected for such service, guiding them along paths that would ultimately lead to the same choice that Gwyn had faced in the depths of the kiln. The transformation of divine governance from active rule by conscious beings to maintenance through cyclical sacrifice represented a fundamental shift in the nature of cosmic order, replacing the personal authority that had characterized the golden age of the gods with systemic mechanisms that could continue to operate regardless of individual will or understanding. The Age of Fire would endure not through the wisdom and strength of divine rulers, but through the willingness of exceptional individuals to surrender their personal existence in service of principles that transcended any single consciousness. Yet the linking had also created the Lord of Cinder, a hollow remnant of what Gwyn had once been that retained enough divine power to pose a final challenge to those who sought to claim his role as fuel for the cosmic fire. This guardian of the flame's threshold embodied the tragedy of sacrifice that consumed everything it meant to preserve, a being that existed in the space between conscious purpose and mechanical function, driven by instincts that were no longer fully comprehensible even to itself. The confrontation between each new chosen undead and the Lord of Cinder represented the philosophical heart of the system that Gwyn's sacrifice had established, forcing potential successors to face the reality of what their own linking would accomplish and cost. Those who proved capable of defeating the hollow remnant of the former Lord of Sunlight demonstrated their worthiness to take his place, while their victory served as proof that the cycle could continue, despite the terrible personal price it demanded from each participant. The Age of Fire had been preserved through the ultimate sacrifice of its greatest champion, but the preservation had come at a cost that transformed the very nature of what was being preserved. The world that continued to exist under the enhanced flame's protection was no longer the world of divine rule and cosmic authority that had flourished during Gwyn's active reign, but rather a realm where meaning and purpose could be found only through acceptance of cyclical sacrifice that turned individual consciousness into fuel for continued cosmic order. The linking had established not just a temporary solution to the crisis of the first flames fading, but a permanent system that would govern the relationship between conscious beings and cosmic forces for all the ages to come, ensuring that the Age of Fire could endure indefinitely, so long as exceptional individuals could be found who were willing to surrender their existence in service of principles greater than personal survival or satisfaction. The Lord of Sunlight was gone, transformed into something that transcended individual identity while serving the same cosmic purposes that had originally motivated his claim upon divine authority. The sacrifice was complete, the system was established, and the Age of Fire entered a new phase of existence that would be defined not by the will of gods, but by the choices of mortals who proved themselves worthy of the ultimate service that cosmic order demanded. The transformation of Gwyn from living deity to eternal fuel for the cosmic fire had indeed preserved the Age of Fire from immediate extinction, but the world that emerged from this ultimate sacrifice bore little resemblance to the golden realm of divine authority that had flourished during the height of his active rule. The linking had established not just a new source of power for the first flame, but a fundamentally different relationship between consciousness and cosmic order, one that would define existence for all the ages to come through cycles of sacrifice and renewal that operated beyond the understanding or control of any single will. The divine city of Anorlondo, once the shining crown jewel of cosmic civilization, where gods and mortals had gathered to witness the flowering of order and beauty beyond imagination, began its long slide into the twilight magnificence that would characterize its existence throughout the centuries that followed Gwyn's departure from the realm of individual consciousness. The great halls that had once echoed with the laughter of divine celebration and the weighty discussions of cosmic governance now rang with a different kind of sound. The hollow footsteps of silver knights who continued their eternal patrol through corridors that grew emptier with each passing year. These loyal guardians of divine authority maintained their posts with mechanical precision that spoke of duty transcending understanding, their silver armor reflecting light that seemed somehow dimmer than it had during the Golden Age, their movements following patterns that had been established during more prosperous times, but were now performed more from habit than from any conscious comprehension of their ultimate purpose. They were the last remnants of an age when divine will had shaped reality through active intervention, now reduced to preserving the appearance of continued authority, while the substance of power had been transformed into something that operated according to very different principles. Prince Gwendolyn, the sole surviving member of the royal family who had remained within the divine city during its period of greatest crisis, found himself inheriting responsibilities that had never been intended for his unique nature and abilities, his mastery of lunar magic and illusion, becoming not just useful tools, but essential mechanisms for maintaining Anorlondo's function as a symbol of divine authority. The prince's work took on dimensions that went far beyond mere deception, encompassing the creation and maintenance of an entire artificial reality that could preserve the appearance of divine prosperity while concealing the fundamental emptiness that had settled over the city like morning fog that never lifts. The illusions that Gwendolyn wove throughout the divine city were masterpieces of magical artistry that required constant attention and periodic renewal, each false image demanding energy and focus that might otherwise have been devoted to addressing the underlying problems that made deception necessary in the first place. The phantom of Princess Guinevere that greeted visitors to the great cathedral blazed with radiant beauty that seemed almost more real than memory, her voice carrying tones of divine authority that could inspire faith and devotion in hearts that might otherwise have despaired at the evidence of cosmic decline. Yet maintaining such extensive illusions across the entire span of the divine city exacted a toll that went beyond mere magical exhaustion, drawing upon reserves of power and will that Prince Gwyn could not indefinitely sustain without risking his own transformation into something that bore little resemblance to his original nature. The prince found himself caught between the necessity of preserving appearances and the growing certainty that his efforts were delaying rather than preventing the recognition of truths that could not be hidden forever. The chambers of Anor Londo that had once bustled with divine activity slowly emptied as the practical functions of cosmic governance were transferred to systems that operated through the enhanced first flame rather than through direct divine intervention. The council halls where gods had debated matters of universal importance fell silent, their great tables covered with dust that accumulated despite the diligent efforts of servants who continued to maintain the city's physical structures even as their purpose grew increasingly unclear. The libraries that had contained the accumulated wisdom of divine civilization became repositories of knowledge that had lost much of its practical relevance, their scrolls and tomes preserving insights and instructions for managing a world that no longer existed in the form for which such guidance had been originally developed. Scholars who gained access to these collections found themselves studying the records of an age whose assumptions about the nature of reality had been fundamentally altered by events that rendered much traditional knowledge obsolete or actively misleading. The armories where weapons of divine craftsmanship had been stored against the possibility of future conflicts became museums of a military tradition that had been transformed by the linking of the fire, their gleaming spears and blessed shields serving more as monuments to past glory than as tools for current use. The techniques of warfare that had been developed for conflicts between divine beings proved inadequate for addressing the new categories of threat that emerged in a world governed by cyclical sacrifice rather than active divine intervention. The great bells of Anor Londo that had once rung to mark the passage of divine time and announce significant events in the cosmic calendar were repurposed to serve the new system that Gwyn's sacrifice had established, their tones now carrying messages that reached not toward celebration or ceremony, but toward the summoning of chosen undead to their appointed roles in maintaining the continuation of the Age of Fire. The music that had once accompanied divine festivals was replaced by more solemn harmonies that spoke of duty and sacrifice rather than joy and achievement. The spread of the undead curse throughout human civilization created new patterns of migration and settlement that disrupted the stable social structures that had supported mortal kingdoms during more prosperous times. The cursed pilgrims who retained their sanity, finding themselves drawn toward locations where they might find temporary respite from the progressive hollowing that threatened to strip away everything that made their existence meaningful. These wanderers carried with them stories and memories from regions that had become increasingly isolated from one another, serving as living links between communities that might otherwise have lost all contact with the wider world. The undead asylums that were constructed throughout the mortal lands served as both refuges and prisons, their primary function being the identification and cultivation of individuals who might possess the exceptional qualities necessary for service in the new cosmic order that had emerged from Gwyn's ultimate sacrifice. These institutions operated according to principles that balanced humanitarian concern for the cursed with practical necessity of screening potential candidates for the terrible honor of linking the fire when cosmic conditions demanded renewal of its power. The tests and trials that were administered within these asylums were designed to evaluate not just combat prowess or magical ability, but the deeper qualities of character, that would enable an individual to make the ultimate sacrifice without succumbing to despair or madness during the process. The administrators of these facilities found themselves serving roles that combined aspects of teacher, judge, and priest, their responsibility extending beyond mere evaluation to encompass the spiritual preparation necessary for those selected to serve as potential saviors of the cosmic order. The hollow corruption that spread throughout the cursed population created new categories of threat and tragedy that divine authority had never anticipated during the development of policies intended to prevent far worse forms of transformation. These mindless shells of former humans retained enough physical capability to pose dangers to the living, while lacking any trace of the consciousness or moral restraint that might have made rehabilitation or peaceful coexistence possible. The settlements that managed to survive and even prosper during this age of cosmic twilight were those that developed effective strategies for managing the presence of hollow corruption while maintaining enough human connection to preserve the social bonds that made civilization possible. These communities often centered around individuals whose exceptional resistance to the curse's effects allowed them to serve as anchors of sanity and purpose for those struggling to maintain their humanity in increasingly difficult circumstances. The merchants and traders who traveled between these scattered settlements carried more than mere goods, serving as conduits for information and cultural exchange that helped preserve some semblance of shared civilization, despite the barriers that hollow corruption created between different regions. Their caravans followed routes that had been carefully mapped to avoid areas where hollow concentration made travel too dangerous, while their presence in remote communities provided connections to the wider world that might otherwise have been completely lost. The religious traditions that emerged during this period reflected the transformed relationship between mortal beings and cosmic forces, incorporating elements of the older way of white with new understandings that emerged from direct experience of cyclical sacrifice and renewal. These evolved doctrines taught that meaning could be found not through the achievement of personal goals or the accumulation of individual power, but through acceptance of roles within larger patterns that transcended any single lifetime or consciousness. The pilgrimage routes that connected various sites of cosmic significance became pathways not just for physical travel but for spiritual development, their stations marking stages in the journey toward understanding that prepared exceptional individuals for the possibility of ultimate service to the cosmic order. These paths were maintained not by official decree but through the voluntary efforts of those who found in their preservation a form of meaning that helped justify continued existence despite the progressive loss of everything that had once made life valuable. The stories and legends that developed around the figure of Gwyn during this period transformed the memory of his sacrifice into mythic narratives that could provide comfort and inspiration to those struggling with their own relationship to the cosmic forces that governed their existence. These tales often emphasized not the political and strategic considerations that had actually motivated his decision, but rather the personal courage and selfless love that had enabled him to surrender individual consciousness for the sake of preserving something greater than himself. The weapons and artifacts that bore traces of divine power from the Golden Age became objects of veneration and careful study, their presence serving as tangible links to an age when cosmic forces had operated according to more comprehensible principles. The techniques for maintaining and utilizing these relics were preserved through traditions that combined practical craftsmanship with ritual observance, their practitioners serving as guardians of knowledge that might prove essential for the continuation of civilization during future crises. The chosen undead who were selected for training in preparation for potential linking sacrifice found themselves following paths that retraced many of the same steps that Gwyn had taken during his own journey toward ultimate transformation. their trials designed not just to test their capabilities, but to provide the understanding necessary for making informed decisions about the cosmic responsibilities they might be called upon to accept. These individuals often developed bonds with one another that transcended ordinary friendship, united as they were by shared recognition of the terrible honor that might await them. The ringing of the bells that summoned chosen undead to their destiny created moments of profound transformation throughout the scattered settlements, their tones carrying power that penetrated consciousness in ways that ordinary sound could never achieve. Those who heard these calls and understood their meaning found themselves facing choices that would define not just their own fate, but the continuation of everything they had ever known or loved. Their decisions carrying weight that no individual should have been asked to bear alone. The gradual recognition among scholars and philosophers that the Age of Fire could theoretically continue indefinitely through cyclical sacrifice brought both comfort and horror to minds capable of grasping the full implications of such a pain system. The preservation of cosmic order no longer depended upon the wisdom or strength of divine rulers, but upon the willingness of exceptional mortals to surrender their existence in service of principles that transcended personal understanding, creating a form of immortality for civilization that was purchased through the systematic consumption of individual consciousness. The empty throne that remained in the Great Hall of Aenor Londo served as a constant reminder of what had been sacrificed to preserve the world from far worse forms of transformation. Its vacant seat representing not just the loss of a particular ruler, but the end of an entire approach to cosmic governance that had defined reality since the defeat of the everlasting dragons. The Silver Knights who maintained their vigilant guard around this symbol of abandoned authority served purposes that went beyond mere ceremony, their presence preserving the possibility that divine rule might one day be restored, if circumstances ever again made such governance feasible or desirable. The fading light that filtered through the great windows of the divine city carried within it traces of the enhanced First Flame's radiance, its golden tones serving as reminders that Gwyn's sacrifice had indeed succeeded in its primary purpose of preserving the Age of Fire for continuation into an indefinite future. Yet the quality of this light was subtly different from what had illuminated the city during its golden age. Its brilliance somehow more remote and impersonal, as if it emerged from sources that had transcended individual will or consciousness. The world had been saved from extinction, but the salvation had come at a cost that transformed the very nature of what had been preserved, creating a form of existence that partook of both triumph and tragedy in measures that defied easy evaluation or judgment. The Age of Fire would endure, but it would do so through mechanisms that bore little resemblance to the divine authority that had originally established its dominion over the cosmic forces that shaped reality. The continuation of light and order, now dependent upon the systematic sacrifice of consciousness itself, in service of principles that operated beyond the understanding of those who served them. The establishment of the cyclical system that emerged from Gwyn's ultimate sacrifice had indeed preserved the Age of Fire from immediate extinction, but in doing so, it had created something far more complex and profound than a mere postponement of cosmic catastrophe. The linking of the fire had transformed the very nature of existence itself, establishing patterns of renewal and sacrifice that operated according to principles which transcended the understanding of any individual consciousness, divine or mortal, creating a form of cosmic order that was both more enduring and more terrible than anything that had come before. The cycle that now governed reality functioned with the inexorable precision of natural law, its mechanisms operating beyond the reach of personal will or preference, demanding from each generation the same ultimate sacrifice that Gwyn had made in the depths of the kiln of the First Flame. Yet this was not mere repetition, but a form of cosmic breathing, each linking, adding new dimensions to the enhanced flame's power, while the gradual dimming between renewals created spaces where different forms of consciousness could flourish and develop their own relationship to the eternal patterns that shaped their existence. The philosophical implications of such a system challenged every assumption about the nature of individual identity and personal meaning that had developed during the ages when divine rule had operated through the exercise of conscious will and deliberate choice. The cycle demanded not just the surrender of life, but the dissolution of self, the complete transformation of individual consciousness into fuel for forces that operated on scales which made personal desires and aspirations seem as insignificant as the flickering of candle flames in the face of cosmic conflagration. Yet within this apparent negation of individual significance lay paradoxes that revealed deeper truths about the relationship between consciousness and cosmic order. For the cycle could not function without the willing participation of beings capable of understanding the choice they were making and accepting its consequences, with full awareness of what their sacrifice would accomplish and cost. The system that consumed individual consciousness was itself dependent upon the highest expressions of individual will and understanding, creating a form of cosmic irony that spoke to mysteries which purely rational analysis could not hope to penetrate or resolve. The chosen undead who answered the summons of the bells found themselves confronting not just physical trials or tests of combat prowess, but philosophical challenges that went to the very heart of what it meant to exist as conscious beings. In a universe governed by forces that transcended personal comprehension, their journey toward the kiln of the first flame became a form of meditation on the nature of identity itself, each step stripping away another layer of attachment to individual desire until what remained was pure intention, focused on service to principles that could not be fully understood but could be completely embraced. The trials that tested potential successors to Gwyn's sacrifice were designed not merely to evaluate their capabilities, but to prepare them for the transformation they would undergo if they chose to link the fire, their experiences serving as a form of gradual dissolution that made the final surrender of consciousness less a violent ending than a natural completion of a process that had been unfolding throughout their entire pilgrimage toward cosmic service. The defeated enemies and overcome obstacles that marked their progress were not arbitrary challenges, but symbolic representations of the various forms of attachment and illusion that had to be released before true sacrifice became possible. The Lords of Cinder, who had previously linked the fire, and whose essence had been incorporated into the enhanced flames burning, existed in a state that defied conventional categories of existence or non-existence. Their consciousness dispersed throughout the cosmic fire, while retaining enough individual character to influence its behavior according to the wisdom and perspective they had possessed during their mortal existence. These were not ghosts or spirits in any traditional sense, but rather aspects of cosmic consciousness that embodied different approaches to the ultimate questions that governed the relationship between individual will and universal order. The dreams and visions that sometimes reached living beings from these dispersed consciousnesses carried messages that operated beyond the boundaries of ordinary communication, their meaning emerging not through words or images, but through direct transmission of understanding that could reshape the recipient's entire relationship to the cosmic forces that governed their existence. These communications served not as commands or instructions, but as invitations to deeper comprehension of the patterns that connected all conscious beings to the eternal cycles that sustained reality itself. The possibility of breaking the cycle had been contemplated by philosophers and scholars throughout the ages since its establishment. their investigations revealing that such a transformation would require not just the refusal of a single chosen undead to link the fire, but a fundamental alteration in the cosmic principles that had made the cycle necessary in the first place. The extinction of the first flame would indeed end the Age of Fire, but the consequences of such an ending remained matters of speculation that touched upon the deepest mysteries of existence itself. Some theoretical analyses suggested that allowing the flame to die would result in a return to the grey fog and timeless stagnation of the Age of Ancients, all the achievements of consciousness, and will dissolving back into the primordial uniformity from which they had originally emerged. Others proposed that the accumulated power and understanding developed throughout the Age of Fire had created possibilities that had not existed during the ancient world, opening pathways toward forms of existence that transcended the simple alternation between light and dark, order and chaos. The dark soul that had been claimed by the furtive pygmy in the ancient days continued to fragment and multiply throughout the cursed human population, its influence growing stronger with each generation as the enhanced First Flame's power was gradually consumed by the demands of maintaining cosmic order. This parallel development suggested that the cycle itself might eventually produce conditions where alternative forms of cosmic organization became not just possible but inevitable. The systematic consumption of consciousness through linking, creating space for different kinds of awareness to emerge and flourish. The relationship between hope and despair within the cyclical system revealed itself to be more complex than simple opposition, each emotion serving essential functions in maintaining the psychological conditions necessary for the cycle's continuation. Hope provided the motivation that allowed potential linkers to undertake their terrible pilgrimage, while despair created the detachment from personal existence that made the ultimate sacrifice psychologically possible. Together, these emotional forces operated as cosmic mechanisms that ensured a steady supply of consciousness willing to transform itself into fuel for the enhanced flames burning. The meaning that individuals discovered within the cyclical system often emerged not from traditional sources of significance such as personal achievement or interpersonal relationships, but from recognition of their participation in patterns that extended far beyond any single lifetime or conscious experience. This form of meaning was simultaneously more humble and more grandiose than conventional forms of purpose, acknowledging the insignificance of individual existence while celebrating its essential role in maintaining the cosmic order that made all existence possible. The gradual transformation of memory into myth throughout the ages since Gwyn's sacrifice had created a body of legend and story that served not just as entertainment or historical record, but as a form of collective meditation on the themes and questions that the cyclical system raised about the nature of consciousness and cosmic responsibility. These narratives evolved through countless retellings, each version adding new insights while preserving the essential truths that made them valuable guides for those seeking to understand their own relationship to the eternal patterns that shaped their existence. The institutions that emerged to support and maintain the cyclical system developed their own forms of wisdom and tradition, their practices incorporating both practical knowledge about the management of cosmic forces and philosophical understanding about the deeper questions that such management raised. These organizations served not just administrative functions but spiritual roles, helping individuals and communities find meaning and purpose within a system that could easily overwhelm consciousness with its vast scope and terrible demands. The artifacts and locations that bore traces of divine power from earlier ages became focal points for meditation and study, their presence serving as reminders that the cyclical system had emerged from specific historical circumstances rather than existing as eternal natural law. The preservation and interpretation of these relics created opportunities for understanding that the cycle itself was subject to change and evolution. its current form, representing one possible response to cosmic challenges, rather than the only conceivable solution to the fundamental problems of existence. The question of whether consciousness itself was enhanced or diminished by participation in the cyclical system remained a matter of profound debate among those capable of grasping its full implications. The systematic transformation of individual awareness into cosmic fuel could be interpreted as the ultimate expression of consciousness transcending its limitations, or alternatively, as the most complete form of consciousness destroying itself through service to principles that operated beyond the realm of understanding or choice. The beauty that could be found within the cyclical system emerged not from its perfection or ultimate resolution of cosmic problems, but from the courage and dedication that conscious beings displayed in accepting roles within patterns that exceeded their comprehension while demanding everything they possessed. This was beauty born from sacrifice and service, meaning discovered through surrender rather than achievement. Transcendence reached through dissolution, rather than expansion of individual identity. The eternal nature of the cycle created forms of continuity that connected all participants across the vast stretches of time that separated their individual contributions to the maintenance of cosmic order, their sacrifices becoming part of a tapestry of meaning that extended beyond any single thread, while depending upon each individual contribution for its continued existence and development. The enhanced flame that burned through their combined consciousness carried within its light traces of every being who had chosen to transform personal existence into service of the greater patterns that sustained reality itself. The cycle endured, patient as the turning of seasons and inexorable as the passage of time, its mechanisms operating beyond the reach of individual will, while remaining dependent upon the highest expressions of individual choice and understanding. Each new chosen undead who approached the kiln of the first flame carried within their consciousness the accumulated wisdom of all who had walked that path before them, while their own unique perspective added new dimensions to the eternal dialogue between consciousness and cosmic order that defined the very heart of existence itself. And so our journey through the twilight of the gods draws to its gentle close, like the last ember finally surrendering to the peaceful darkness it has held at bay for so long. We have witnessed the rise and fall of ages, the desperate struggles of immortal beings who discovered they were not so different from mortals after all, and the endless cycle that binds all things in its patient embrace. Gwyn's age fades, as all ages must, yet something beautiful remains in that fading, the knowledge that even gods can love deeply enough to sacrifice everything, that even in futility there can be nobility, and that every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning. The fire may dim and the darkness may come, but the cycle itself endures, patient and eternal as the turning of seasons. As you drift toward your own peaceful darkness, carry with you not the weight of these cosmic struggles, but their quiet wisdom that all things pass, all burdens lift, and in the end, there is rest for every weary soul. The flame fades, the dark comes, and in that darkness, there is peace. Sleep now, and let the ancient sorrows transform into the gentle dreams of those who have found their rest at last.